She buried her husband on a Tuesday, her father on a Friday, and by Sunday, 6 killers were riding toward her door to take everything she had left. Rhea Marston stood alone on the porch of her dying ranch, a shotgun in her trembling hands, waiting for death, until a stranger appeared on the horizon and whispered 3 words that changed everything. "Trust me, ma'am." This is the story of a widow who thought her life was over, and the cowboy who proved her wrong with a single kiss. Stay with me until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The Arizona sun had no mercy. It hung in the pale sky like a burning eye, watching without compassion as Rhea Marston drove the shovel into the hard, cracked earth one final time. Her arms screamed with exhaustion. Her back had gone numb hours ago. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant falling into a darkness so deep she wasn't sure she'd ever climb out. The grave was finally deep enough. She stood at its edge, chest heaving, sweat dripping from her brow onto the dry ground below. The wooden coffin sat behind her, rough pine boards she'd hammered together herself because there was no one left to help. No neighbors willing to ride out this far. No friends brave enough to defy the men who'd marked this land for death. Just her and him, Thomas Marston, her father, the last person on this earth who had loved her. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered, her voice cracking like the desert floor. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." The wind answered with silence. 3 months ago, she'd stood in this exact spot and buried her husband, Daniel. A fever had taken him, swift and cruel, stealing him in the night while she held his hand and begged God for one more day. She'd been granted nothing. Daniel had slipped away before dawn, leaving her a widow at 26, alone on a ranch that suddenly felt like a prison. But she'd had her father then. Thomas Marston, 63 years old with silver in his beard and iron in his spine, had ridden out from town the moment he'd heard. He'd held her while she wept. He'd kept the ranch running while grief consumed her. He'd promised her, with that steady voice she'd trusted her whole life, that everything would be all right. "We'll get through this, Rhea girl, together, the way Marstons always have." Together lasted exactly 11 weeks. The Drummond gang had come on a Wednesday, 6 riders emerging from the dust like demons crawling out of hell. They'd wanted the ranch, the water rights, the grazing land that connected their stolen territory to the river. Thomas had stood on this very porch with his Winchester and told them to ride on. They'd shot him where he stood. Rhea had watched from the kitchen window, frozen in horror, as her father crumpled to the wooden boards. She'd screamed, a sound that didn't feel human, and grabbed Daniel's old shotgun from above the fireplace. By the time she'd reached the porch, the riders were already retreating, their leader, a snake-eyed man named Silas Drummond, calling back over his shoulder. "We'll be back, widow. This land is ours now. You got 1 week to clear out, or you'll be buried right next to them." Thomas had died in her arms, his blood soaking into her dress. His last words a rasping command. "Run, Rhea. Get out. Don't let them. Don't let them." He never finished the sentence. That was 6 days ago. Now Rhea stood at the edge of his grave, the afternoon sun beating down on her shoulders, and realized she had exactly 1 day left before the killers returned. She lowered her father's body into the ground with ropes she could barely grip. Her hands were blistered. Her muscles trembled. But she managed it, inch by agonizing inch, until the coffin rested at the bottom of the hole and the ropes went slack in her bleeding palms. "The Lord is my shepherd," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I shall not want." The words felt hollow, empty. She'd recited them at Daniel's funeral and meant every syllable. Now they tasted like ash on her tongue. I shall not want. But she did want. She wanted her husband back. She wanted her father back. She wanted to wake up and discover this was all a nightmare, that she was still a happy bride on a thriving ranch, with decades of love stretching out before her like an endless summer. Instead, she was alone, completely, utterly alone. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures," she continued, forcing the words out. "He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." Her voice broke. He restoreth my soul. Could a soul this shattered ever be restored? Could anything fill the void where her heart used to be? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, she was walking through it now, had been walking through it for months. The shadow had swallowed her whole, and she couldn't see the light at the end anymore. Couldn't see anything except darkness and dust and the barrel of Silas Drummond's gun pointed at her future. I will fear no evil. A lie. She feared everything now. For thou art with me. Another lie. God felt very far away. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. She felt no comfort, only pain. Rhea closed her eyes and let the tears come. They carved hot trails down her dust-caked cheeks, falling like rain onto the grave of the last man who had ever protected her. Goodbye, Papa, she choked out. I love you. I'll always love you. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I have to leave you here. She picked up the shovel and began filling in the grave. Each scoop of dirt felt like a nail in her own coffin. Each thud against the wooden lid sounded like a heartbeat, the heartbeat of a man who would never draw breath again. By the time she finished, the sun had begun its descent toward the western mountains. Long shadows stretched across the ranch yard, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Now it just looked like the end of the world. Rhea walked back to the farmhouse on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The porch steps creaked under her weight, the same steps where her father had fallen, where his blood still stained the wood no matter how many times she'd scrubbed. She'd stopped scrubbing after the third attempt. Some stains, she'd learned, never came out. The inside of the house was dim and quiet, filled with the ghosts of better days. There was the chair where Daniel used to sit and read to her by lamplight. There was the kitchen table where Thomas would drink his morning coffee and tell stories about her mother, dead these 20 years but still alive in his memories. There was the bedroom where she'd shared 1,000 tender moments with her husband, now cold and empty as a tomb. She couldn't stay here. She'd realized that the moment Silas Drummond rode away, this ranch was a target now, a bullseye painted in her father's blood. The Drummond gang had killed before and would kill again. They controlled 3 counties through fear and violence, and no sheriff had ever managed to bring them to justice. If she stayed, she would die. It was that simple. So she'd spent the past 5 days preparing to leave, selling what livestock she could to a trader passing through, packing the wagon with essentials, writing letters to distant relatives back east, cousins she'd never met, an aunt in Philadelphia who might take pity on a widowed orphan. Tomorrow morning, before the gang returned, she would ride away and never look back. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like surrender. Rhea moved through the house in a daze, gathering the last of her belongings. Her mother's silver hairbrush, the wedding quilt her grandmother had sewn, a tintype photograph of Daniel on their wedding day, his smile frozen forever in sepia tones. She held the photograph for a long moment, tracing the outline of his face with her fingertip. I wish you were here, she whispered. I wish you could tell me what to do. But Daniel was silent, locked behind glass and silver, forever 28 years old while she grew older and lonelier by the day. She tucked the photograph into her carpet bag and moved to the mantel, where her father's pocket watch sat beside a worn Bible. The watch had belonged to her grandfather before Thomas, passed down through 3 generations of Marston men. There were no Marston men left now. The line ended with her. Rhea picked up the watch and felt its familiar weight in her palm. The brass was warm from sitting in the sunlight, almost like it still carried some echo of her father's touch. She pressed it to her cheek and closed her eyes, remembering how he used to check the time before dinner, how he'd flip it open with a practiced flick of his thumb and announce that her mother's biscuits were exactly 7 minutes from perfection. The memory brought fresh tears. I won't forget you, she promised the empty room. Any of you. I'll carry you with me wherever I go. She slipped the watch into her pocket and reached for the Bible, then froze. Through the front window she saw movement, dust clouds, rising from the east road, growing larger by the second. Riders. They're early, she thought, ice flooding her veins. They're a day early. Her hand flew to Daniel's shotgun, still propped beside the door where she'd left it after the last attack. Her fingers wrapped around the worn wooden stock as her heart hammered against her ribs. How many? She squinted through the dusty glass, trying to count the shapes emerging from the cloud. 2? 3? Not 6, she realized. Not the whole gang, but that didn't mean she was safe. Even one of Drummond's men could kill her easily. She was exhausted, half-starved, emotionally destroyed. She'd fired a gun perhaps a dozen times in her life, and never at a living target. But I will today, she told herself, surprised by the steel in her own thoughts. If they've come to kill me, I'll take at least one with me. For Daniel. For Papa. She positioned herself behind the door frame, angling the shotgun toward the porch. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way Thomas had taught her when she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. Fear is natural, Rhea girl. Only fools say they're never afraid, but courage, real courage, is doing what needs doing even when your knees are shaking, especially then. Her knees were shaking now, but she wasn't running. The riders grew closer. She could see them clearly now. 2 men on horseback, approaching at an easy trot. One rode a tall black stallion, sitting straight in the saddle with the casual confidence of a man who'd spent more hours on horseback than on foot. The other was younger, riding a painted mare, his posture more relaxed. Neither wore the distinctive red bandanas of the Drummond gang, but that meant nothing. Outlaws changed their colors. Killers came in all disguises. Rhea tightened her grip on the shotgun and waited. The riders reached the edge of her property and slowed. The man on the black stallion raised one hand, a gesture of peace perhaps, or surrender, and called out in a voice that carried clearly across the afternoon stillness. "Hello in the house! We're not looking for trouble!" That's what killers always say, Rhea thought bitterly. She didn't respond, didn't move, just watched through the narrow gap between door and frame as the 2 men exchanged a glance. "Ma'am," the older one called again. "My name is Cole Barron. I'm a United States Marshal operating out of Tucson. This is my brother Jack. We'd like to talk to you if you're willing." A marshal? Rhea's heart stuttered. She'd heard nothing about any marshal coming to these parts. No one had sent for law enforcement. She certainly hadn't. And Thomas had died before he could. Could this be real? Or was it another trap? She thought of Silas Drummond's snake eyes, the casual cruelty in his smile. Would he send men pretending to be lawmen? It seemed exactly like something he'd do. Get her to lower her guard, open the door, trust the wrong face. "I've got a shotgun pointed at you," she shouted back, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I know how to use it." A lie, mostly. But he didn't need to know that. The man who called himself Cole Barron didn't flinch. He kept his hands visible, away from the gun belt at his hip, and nodded slowly. "I believe you, ma'am. And I'd feel the same way in your position. These are dangerous times. They certainly are for lawmen who trespass on private property. We're not trespassing. The road runs through public land. We stopped at your fence line." He paused. "If you want, I can show you my badge. Prove I am who I say." "How do I know the badge is real?" Another pause. This time, the younger man, Jack, leaned forward in his saddle with an exasperated sigh. "Ma'am, with respect, if we wanted you dead, we wouldn't be sitting here having a conversation about it. We're trying to help." "Jack?" Cole's voice was quiet but firm. The younger man immediately fell silent. "My apologies, ma'am. My brother lacks patience sometimes." "I lack patience," Jack muttered. "Cole, we've been riding for—" "Enough." The single word carried an authority that brooked no argument. Jack slumped back in his saddle, visibly chastened. Rhea watched this exchange with growing uncertainty. These 2 didn't seem like Drummond's men. The gang was known for their brutality, their crude manners, their drunken violence. This older man, Cole, had a stillness about him, a quiet gravity that reminded her strangely of her father. And there was something in his voice, something honest. Or maybe I'm just desperate to believe someone's finally come to help. "What do you want?" she called out, not lowering the gun. "To talk. Just talk. 10 minutes of your time." Cole reached slowly, very slowly, into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a glint of metal. This is my badge, the real thing. I'll ride closer so you can see it properly, if you'll permit me. Rhea hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to keep the door between herself and these strangers, to trust no one. But another part of her, the part that was exhausted from carrying this weight alone, whispered something different. What if they really can help? Come forward, she said finally, slowly, and keep your hands where I can see them. Yes, ma'am. Cole nudged his horse forward at a walk, hands raised to shoulder height, the leather wallet balanced on his open palm. He stopped about 10 feet from the porch and held the badge up toward the house. From this distance, Rhea could see it clearly. The familiar star shape, the words engraved around the rim, United States Marshal. It looked real. But so had Daniel the night before he died. So had her father the morning before he was killed. Reality had a way of collapsing into nightmare without warning. All right, she said slowly. You're a marshal. That doesn't explain what you want with me. May I dismount? A hesitation, then, yes. Cole swung down from his saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. On the ground, he seemed even larger. Broad shoulders, strong build, maybe 6 feet tall. His face was weathered, but not old, creased by sun and wind rather than years. Late 30s, perhaps. Early 40s. Dark hair visible beneath his hat, shot through with the first hints of gray. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were a pale, piercing blue, the color of winter ice, and they carried a weight she recognized. A weariness, a sorrow, the eyes of a man who'd seen too much death. My name is Cole Barron, he said again. I've been tracking the Drummond gang for 8 months. Their trail led me here. He paused. To your ranch. Rhea felt the blood drain from her face. The Drummond gang, she repeated flatly. Yes, ma'am. Silas Drummond and his crew, wanted for murder, robbery, and cattle rustling across 3 territories. Cole's voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. I understand they've been here before, that they hurt your family. The shotgun trembled in Rhea's hands. They killed my father, she whispered. Shot him down on this very porch. Something shifted in Cole's expression. A flicker of pain, quickly suppressed. I'm sorry, he said. And the way he said it, quiet, genuine, without empty platitudes, made her believe he meant it. Sorry doesn't bring him back. No, it doesn't. He took a breath. But maybe I can do something better than sorry. Maybe I can give you justice. Rhea stared at him. The word hung in the air between them, strange and unfamiliar. Justice. She'd stopped believing in it the moment her father hit the ground. How? She asked, hating the hope that crept into her voice. Cole glanced back at his brother, who still sat on his horse near the fence, then turned to face her again. The Drummond gang has evaded the law for years because they never stay in one place long enough to be caught. They hit a ranch, take what they want, and disappear into the mountains before anyone can organize a posse. He paused. But they've made a mistake this time. They've gotten greedy. They've claimed your land as theirs, which means they're coming back. Tomorrow, Rhea said. They said 1 week. Tomorrow is the last day. Then we have until tomorrow to set a trap. Cole's eyes held hers. With your help. My help! A bitter laugh escaped her. Marshal, I'm one woman with a shotgun. I barely know how to fire. What help could I possibly be? You're the bait. The word hit her like a slap. Excuse me? Cole held up a hand. Let me explain. The Drummonds don't know I'm here. They don't know Jack is here. As far as they're concerned, this is just a defenseless ranch with a widow who has no choice but to run or die. His voice softened slightly. If you stay, if you pretend nothing has changed, they'll ride in expecting easy prey. And we'll be waiting for them. Rhea's mind raced. The plan made a brutal kind of sense. Use her as a lure. Let the killers think they'd already won. Then strike when they least expected it. You're asking me to risk my life. Yes, Cole said simply. I am. And if your trap fails? If they kill me before you can stop them? Then I'll die too. No hesitation, no bluster, just a flat statement of fact. I'll put myself between you and every bullet they fire, Mrs. Marston. You have my word. Mrs. Marston. She flinched at the title. Daniel's name. Daniel's ghost. Why? She demanded. Why should I trust you? Why should I believe you'll keep that promise? Cole was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed his hat. A gesture of respect, she realized, the way men remove their hats in church or at gravesides. Because 6 years ago, he said quietly, a gang of outlaws came to my ranch in Colorado. I was away, hunting, up in the mountains. I came home to find my wife and daughter buried in the yard. My brother, he nodded toward Jack, was 13. He'd hidden in the cellar. He survived by staying silent while they burned our house to the ground. Rhea's heart stopped. I've been hunting men like Drummond ever since, Cole continued. Not for money, not for glory, because no one else should have to stand over a grave they dug themselves and wonder if justice even exists. He met her eyes. I can't bring back your father, Mrs. Marston. I can't undo what's been done to you. But I can make sure Silas Drummond never hurts another soul, and I will, with or without your help. The words hung in the dusty air. Rhea looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not just a lawman hunting criminals, not just a stranger making promises he might not keep. She saw a man who understood loss, who carried the same weight she carried, who knew what it meant to bury the people you loved and keep living anyway. A kindred spirit, forged in fire. One day, she heard herself say, if they don't come by sunset tomorrow, I'm leaving. I'll ride east and never look back. Cole nodded. That's fair. And if they do come, if I stay and help you, I want to be there when it's over. I want to see Silas Drummond's face when he realizes he's lost. Something flickered in Cole's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. Agreed. Rhea lowered the shotgun. Her arms ached with the release of tension. Her whole body trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline. You'd better come inside, she said wearily. Both of you. We have a lot to discuss. Cole smiled, a small, fleeting expression that transformed his weathered face. Yes, ma'am. We do. The kitchen table where Rhea had shared so many meals with Daniel and Thomas now hosted a council of war. She sat on one side, a cup of cold coffee untouched before her. Cole and Jack sat across from her, dusty and trail-worn but alert. Between them lay a crude map Cole had sketched on the back of an old feed receipt. The ranch house, the barn, the cellar, the fence line, the road leading east. They'll come from this direction, Cole said, tapping the eastern road. Same way they came before. It's the only approach that gives them clear sight line of the house. 6 of them, Jack added. He was younger than Cole by perhaps 15 years, early 20s, with the same dark hair and angular features, but without the gravity that aged his brother. Silas, his lieutenant Marcus, and 4 others, all armed, all dangerous. I know, Rhea said quietly. I saw them. Then you know what we're up against. Cole leaned forward. Mrs. Marston. Rhea, she interrupted. If I'm going to risk my life on your plan, you can at least call me by my name. Cole paused, then nodded. Rhea, then. We need to be honest with you. This won't be safe. Even with the element of surprise, 6 armed men are a formidable force. There's a very real chance that things will go wrong. Things have already gone wrong, she replied flatly. My husband is dead. My father is dead. I've got nothing left to lose. You've got your life. Is that what this is? She gestured around the empty kitchen. A life? Alone on a ranch I can't run, waiting for killers or starvation or fever to finish what Drummond started? She shook her head. No. If I run east, I'm just delaying the inevitable. Trading one kind of death for another, slow and quiet instead of quick and loud. Jack glanced at his brother, clearly uncomfortable. Cole held her gaze. So you'll stay, he said. I'll stay. But not just as bait. Rhea reached across the table and pulled the map toward her. This is my land, my home. If we're going to fight for it, I need to understand the plan, all of it. Cole studied her for a moment, searching for something in her face. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. All right, he said. Here's what we know. Drummond's pattern is to arrive at midday, when the sun is highest and visibility is best. He'll send one man ahead to scout, probably Marcus, while the rest hang back on the road. Once Marcus confirms the target is clear, they'll move in together. They'll expect me to be alone, Rhea said. Exactly, which is why you need to act like you are. Tomorrow morning, you'll go about your routine, feed the chickens, hang laundry, walk the property, make it look like nothing has changed. While you two hide, while we position ourselves. Cole traced lines on the map. I'll be in the barn loft here. Clear sight line to the house and the road. Jack will be in the root cellar, the one with the external door, ready to flank them once the shooting starts. And when do we spring the trap? When Drummond dismounts. Cole's voice hardened. He likes to gloat. He'll want to look you in the eye and see your fear before he gives the order. That's when I take the first shot. That's when everything changes. Rhea stared at the map, trying to picture it. The chaos, the noise, the blood. And if you miss, I won't miss. The certainty in his voice should have been arrogance. Instead, it felt like a promise. What do I do? She asked. During the fight? Cole hesitated. Ideally, stay inside, stay low. Let us handle... No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Both men looked at her in surprise. I told you, Rhea said, softer but no less firm. I won't be a victim waiting to be saved. If I'm part of this, I'm part of it. Give me a role, a real one. Cole and Jack exchanged a look. Something passed between them, a silent conversation of the kind only brothers could have. Finally, Cole turned back to her. Can you shoot? I hit a coyote once, scared it off anyway. That's not the same as... I know. She lifted her chin. Teach me. Another pause. Then Cole nodded slowly. Tonight, after dark, we'll practice behind the barn where the sound won't carry. He held her gaze. But Rhea, when the shooting starts, things will happen fast. Faster than you can imagine. You may freeze. You may panic. There's no shame in that. It happens to trained soldiers. If it happens to you, don't fight it. Just get down, get small, and stay alive. That's all that matters. What about you? What if you freeze? The ghost of a smile crossed his face. I've never frozen yet. Too stubborn, I suppose. Despite everything, the fear, the grief, the crushing weight of the past 3 months, Rhea felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. I'm stubborn too, she said. Ask anyone who knew me. I'm starting to see that. For a moment, their eyes held. Something passed between them, not warmth exactly, not comfort, but something adjacent. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement of two damaged souls finding unexpected common ground. Then Jack cleared his throat. So, about that coffee, any chance it's still hot? Rhea blinked, the moment broken. I'll make fresh, she said, rising from the table. You both look like you could use a meal, too. When's the last time you ate? Yesterday, Jack admitted. Maybe the day before. Men. Rhea shook her head, moving toward the stove. Always riding headlong into danger without a thought for basic survival. Sit tight. I'll make something. As she busied herself with the kettle and the pantry, she felt Cole's eyes on her back. Watching. Assessing. Maybe wondering, as she was, what tomorrow would bring. She tried not to wonder too hard. Hope was dangerous. She'd learned that the hard way. Night fell over the Marston ranch like a black blanket scattered with stars. Rhea stood behind the barn, Daniel's shotgun in her hands, watching Cole demonstrate the proper stance for the 4th time. Feet shoulder-width apart, he said, his voice low in the darkness. Weight slightly forward. The kick's going to push you back, so you need a solid base. She adjusted her footing. Like this? Better. Now shoulder the weapon. Press the stock firmly into the hollow here. He touched her shoulder lightly, indicating the spot. Not too tight against your body, or the recoil will bruise you, but not too loose, or you'll lose control. The touch was impersonal, professional, but it was also the first time anyone had touched her gently since her father died. She pushed the thought away and focused on the gun. Sight down the barrel, both eyes open. Cole moved beside her, his voice close to her ear. You're not aiming at a single point, you're covering an area. That's the advantage of a shotgun, but you still need to point it in the right direction. At the target. At the target. He stepped back. Now, squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk. Smooth and steady. The gun does the rest. Rhea took a breath, exhaled slowly, squeezed. The blast shattered the night silence. She staggered backward, the recoil worse than she'd anticipated, but she kept her feet. Ahead, in the darkness, she heard the distant thud of buckshot hitting the old fence post they'd set up as a target. Good, Cole said. You hit it. Barely. She lowered the gun, her shoulder aching. That's harder than it looks. It gets easier. Muscle memory. He took the shotgun from her, broke it open, and began reloading. Again! They practiced for an hour, until her arms trembled and her ears rang despite the cotton she'd stuffed in them. By the end, she was hitting the post consistently, not in the center but close enough that it would matter in a fight. You're a quick learner, Cole said as they walked back toward the house, the night air cool against her sweat-damp skin. I had good teachers. She thought of her father, teaching her to ride when she was 6. Daniel, teaching her to dance at their wedding reception. My husband and father, they always believed I could do anything I set my mind to. They were right. The simple affirmation, delivered without flattery or agenda, touched something inside her. She looked away, afraid of what her face might reveal. Tell me about your wife, she said quietly. Cole was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled, but with cracks showing through. Her name was Sarah. She was a school teacher in Denver when I met her, all fire and intelligence and stubborn conviction. She didn't approve of my profession at first, said lawmen made terrible husbands. A pause. She was probably right. But you married anyway. We did. Against her father's wishes, against the advice of everyone who knew us. A ghost of warmth entered his voice. We were happy, Rhea. For 10 years we were so happy it almost hurt. We had a daughter, Emma, who had her mother's smile and her father's stubbornness. I thought that was my life, that I'd finally found something worth more than the badge. And then I went hunting. His voice flattened. 3 days in the mountains chasing elk. I told Sarah I'd be back before Sunday. I was. But by then, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. I'm sorry, Rhea said softly. So am I. Cole stopped walking and looked up at the star-scattered sky. I blamed myself for years, still do, some nights. If I'd been there, if I'd come home sooner, maybe I could have fought them off. Maybe I could have saved them. Or maybe you'd be dead too. Maybe. He lowered his gaze to meet hers. But at least I'd have tried. The words echoed in her mind. At least I'd have tried. Isn't that why she was doing this? Isn't that why she'd agreed to stay and fight instead of running east? Because dying on her feet felt better than living on her knees? Is that why you became a marshal, she asked, after what happened? Part of it, the rest is harder to explain. He started walking again, slow and thoughtful. There's something broken in men like Silas Drummond, something that lets them hurt innocent people without a second thought. I can't fix that, can't change what makes them that way, but I can stop them. I can make sure they never get the chance to break another family the way mine was broken. An eye for an eye. More like a shield for the defenseless. He glanced at her. I know it won't bring Sarah and Emma back. Nothing will. But every widow I spare, every child I protect, it feels like honoring their memory, like their deaths meant something beyond grief. Rhea considered this as they reached the porch steps. That's a heavy burden to carry, she said finally. It is, but it's mine. I chose it, and you're still choosing it every day. Every day. They stood in the darkness, two shadowed figures on a porch stained with blood, and something settled between them. Not peace. They were both too damaged for peace. But understanding. The recognition that they were fighting the same battle, even if they'd come to it by different roads. You should get some sleep, Cole said at last. Tomorrow will be hard. I know. She hesitated at the door. Where will you? The barn. Jack and I will take turns keeping watch. just in case Drummond decides to arrive early. He won't. He gave his word. Cole's smile was weary. Men like Drummond don't have words worth keeping, only power worth taking. She couldn't argue with that. Good night, Marshal. Cole, he corrected gently, if you're risking your life on my plan, you can at least call me by my name. Didal, her own words, echoed back to her. She felt a flush creep up her neck. Good night, Cole. Good night, Rhea. She went inside, closed the door, leaned against it with her eyes shut and her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Don't, she told herself sharply. Don't even think about it. Your husband has been dead 3 months. Your father just went in the ground. You're not allowed to feel whatever this is. But feelings, she was learning, didn't ask for permission. They just came. Dawn broke over the Arizona desert like a wound tearing open. Red and gold streaked the horizon, painting the sky in colors that looked too beautiful for a day that might end in death. Rhea stood at her bedroom window, already dressed, watching the sun climb and thinking about everything that could go wrong. They might come before we're ready. Cole might miss his first shot. Jack might be discovered in the cellar. I might freeze, panic, die before I can even raise my gun. 100 ways to fail, 1,000 ways to die. And yet she felt strangely calm. Maybe it was resignation, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe, just maybe, it was trust. Trust in a man she'd known less than 24 hours, trust in his skill, his experience, his promise to put himself between her and danger. Trust is dangerous, a voice whispered. Trust is how you get hurt. But so was fear, so was running, so was living the rest of her life wondering what might have happened if she'd stayed. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and went downstairs. Jack was already in the kitchen, wolfing down biscuits she'd made the night before. He looked up when she entered, crumbs dotting his chin. Morning, he said through a mouthful of food. Your mother clearly never taught you table manners. She died when I was 8. Cole did his best. The words were casual, but they carried a weight she recognized. Another loss. Another wound that never fully healed. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Jack shrugged, the careless gesture of someone who'd long since learned to bury his pain. It is what it is. Cole raised me after that, taught me everything I know. He grabbed another biscuit, including how to shoot, which is probably going to come in handy today. Let's hope so. The door opened and Cole stepped inside. He was already armed, pistol on his hip, rifle slung across his back, and there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there last night. They're coming, he said. Rhea's heart stopped. What, now? But it's barely... Not now. Soon. He crossed to the window and peered out, his jaw tight. Dust cloud on the eastern horizon. Moving slow, probably stopped for breakfast, but definitely headed this way. How long? 2 hours? Maybe 3. Jack stood, all trace of casualness gone. I should get to the cellar. Not yet. Wait until they're close enough to see the house, then move, fast and quiet. Cole turned to Rhea. Are you ready? Was she ready? Ready to become bait for killers? Ready to fire a gun at another human being? Ready to die on the land she'd tried so hard to leave? No, she wasn't ready at all. But she nodded anyway. Good. Cole's eyes held hers for a moment, a look that said everything he couldn't put into words. Be careful, be brave, survive. Then he glanced at his brother. Jack, remember, wait for my shot. Don't move too soon. I know, Cole, we've done this before. Not like this. Something dark flickered across Cole's face. This one's personal. He left without another word, heading for the barn. Jack watched him go, then turned to Rhea. He likes you, he said suddenly. Rhea blinked. What? My brother. He likes you. Jack grinned, a flash of youthful charm beneath the grim circumstances. I haven't seen him look at a woman that way in 6 years. Not since Sarah. I'm sure you're mistaken. I'm not. He grabbed his hat from the table. And for what it's worth, I think it's a good thing. Cole's been a ghost since Emma and Sarah died, going through the motions, hunting outlaws, never letting anyone close. He paused at the door. Maybe it's time he started living again. Before she could respond, he was gone, slipping out the back and disappearing around the side of the house. Rhea stood alone in the kitchen, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the approaching riders. He likes you. The words echoed in her mind as she moved through the house, preparing for the role she was about to play. She opened the curtains, lit the stove, carried laundry to the back line and hung it with trembling fingers. He likes you. She fed the chickens, scattering grain with mechanical precision, every nerve in her body screaming with awareness. He likes you. She walked the property's edge, pretending to check the fences, all the while watching the dust cloud grow larger on the horizon. He likes you. And God help her, despite everything, despite the grief and the fear and the crushing weight of loss. Some small, secret part of her was glad. They came at noon. Rhea was standing on the porch when she saw them clearly for the first time. 6 riders emerging from the dust like demons riding out of hell. Silas Drummond led the pack, his black duster flapping behind him, a cruel smile already curving his lips. Behind him rode Marcus, his lieutenant, a massive man with a scarred face and dead eyes. And behind Marcus, 4 others whose names she didn't know and didn't care to learn. Killers, all of them. Coming to take her land, coming to take her life. She forced herself to stay calm, to remember the plan, to play the part of a helpless widow with nowhere to run. The lamp, she reminded herself. When they're close enough, light the lamp in the east window. That's the signal. Her hands were steady as she lifted the match, struck it, touched the flame to the wick. A soft glow filled the window, golden and warm and utterly at odds with the violence about to unfold. The trap was set. Now all she could do was wait. Rhea turned back to face the approaching riders, Daniel's shotgun hidden just inside the door, and thought of her husband's smile on their wedding day. I'm going to survive this, she told his ghost. I'm going to survive and rebuild and live the life we dreamed of, even if I have to do it alone. But as Cole's words echoed in her memory, I came here because no one else should have to stand over a grave they dug themselves. She realized something that terrified her even more than the men on horseback. She didn't want to be alone anymore, and that was the most dangerous feeling of all. The dust cloud grew closer with every heartbeat, and Rhea felt time itself begin to stretch and bend in that strange way it does when death approaches. Each second lasted an eternity. Each breath felt like it might be her last. She stood on the porch, her back straight, her chin lifted, wearing the mask of a woman who had already accepted her fate. The lamp glowed in the east window behind her, a silent signal that had already been seen, already been understood, already set into motion events that could not be undone. Silas Drummond rode at the head of his pack like a king surveying conquered territory. Even from this distance, she could see the arrogance in his posture, the casual cruelty in the way he sat his horse. He wasn't rushing. He had all the time in the world because in his mind, this was already over. The widow would run or beg or die. The land would be his, another victory in a long string of victories that had taught him he was untouchable. He was about to learn otherwise. Rhea's gaze flickered briefly to the barn, where she knew Cole waited in the loft with his rifle trained on the yard below. She couldn't see him, that was the point, but knowing he was there steadied something inside her, a calm she hadn't expected, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The riders reached the fence line and slowed. Marcus, the scarred giant, spurred his horse forward and trotted ahead of the group, scanning the property with those dead eyes that had probably watched dozens of innocent people die. This was the scout, the advance guard, exactly as Cole had predicted. Marcus circled the house slowly, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. He checked the barn door. Closed, unremarkable. He peered at the chicken coop, the laundry line, the empty corral where Rhea had sold the last of her horses 2 days ago. Then he turned back to Drummond and raised one hand. All clear. Rhea's heart hammered against her ribs as the remaining 5 riders passed through the gate and approached the house. Their horses' hooves kicked up little clouds of dust that swirled in the noon sun like tiny storms. The creak of leather, the jingle of spurs, the heavy breathing of animals and men who had ridden hard through the desert heat. Silas Drummond reined in his horse 10 feet from the porch and sat there for a long moment, just looking at her. His smile widened, that snake smile she remembered from the day he'd murdered her father. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth as oil and twice as slick. "The widow Marston. Still here, I see." Rhea said nothing. Her throat was too tight for words. "I gave you a week," Drummond continued, swinging down from his saddle with theatrical slowness. "A whole week to pack your things and disappear. Most women would have been grateful for such generosity." He took a step toward the porch, his spurs chiming with each movement. "But here you are, standing on your little porch, waiting for me." He was close now, close enough that she could see the yellow of his teeth, the pockmarks on his weathered face, the cold emptiness in his pale eyes. This was a man who had killed without conscience and would kill again without hesitation, and he was enjoying himself. "Nothing to say?" He mounted the first step, then the second. "Your father had plenty to say, as I recall. Called me all sorts of names before I put him down. Died cursing me with his last breath." A soft laugh. "I respected that, actually. Most men just beg." Rhea found her voice at last, a thin, hoarse whisper that barely carried past her own lips. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Drummond spread his hands in a gesture of mock innocence. "I want what was promised to me. This land, these water rights, everything that should have been mine the moment I decided to take it. It's not yours. It never will be." "That's where you're wrong, sweetheart." He took the final step, standing on the porch now, close enough to touch. "See, ownership is a funny thing out here. Back east, maybe it matters what name is on a deed, but this is the frontier. This is where men take what they can hold and keep what they can defend." His smile turned predatory. "And you, little widow, you can't defend anything." Behind him, the other 5 riders had dismounted. They spread out across the yard in a loose semicircle, blocking any avenue of escape. Marcus stood by the barn door, his massive arms crossed over his chest. The others checked weapons, adjusted hats, waited for their leader to give the word. Rhea's eyes swept across them, counting. 6 in total, just as Cole had said. 6 killers, 3 defenders. Terrible odds, but not impossible. Drummond reached out and touched her face, a gentle caress that made her skin crawl. His fingers traced along her jawline, tilted her chin up, forced her to meet his gaze. "Such a pretty thing," he murmured. "Such a waste, really. If you'd been smarter, if you'd run when you had the chance, you could have started over somewhere, found a new husband, had a new life." His grip tightened. "Now you get to die on this porch, just like your daddy." Something shifted in Rhea's chest. Fear transformed into something harder, colder, a fury so pure it burned away everything else. "My father," she said quietly, "was worth 100 of you." Drummond's smile flickered, his eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I said my father was a good man, a decent man. He built this ranch with his own hands and never took anything that wasn't rightfully his." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "He died protecting his family, which is more than a coward like you could ever understand." The slap came hard and fast, Drummond's open palm cracking across her cheek with enough force to snap her head sideways. Stars exploded in her vision. The taste of copper filled her mouth. But she didn't fall. She stood her ground, turned back to face him, and smiled through the blood on her lips. "Is that the best you can do?" Drummond's face twisted with rage. He reached for his gun, and the world exploded. The shot came from the barn, shattering the noon stillness like a thunderclap. One moment Marcus was standing by the door with his arms crossed. The next he was falling, a red bloom spreading across his chest, dead before he hit the ground. For a single frozen heartbeat, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. Cole's second shot took the man nearest the corral, a clean hit through the throat that sent him spinning into the dust. The remaining outlaws scattered, drawing weapons, shouting, searching frantically for the source of the gunfire. Drummond's reaction was instantaneous. He grabbed Rhea by the hair and yanked her in front of him like a shield, pressing the barrel of his pistol against her temple. "Show yourself!" he screamed toward the barn. "Show yourself, or I blow her brains out!" Silence from the loft. But Rhea knew Cole was still there, watching, waiting, calculating angles and odds with that cold precision she'd glimpsed behind his steady blue eyes. The cellar door exploded outward, and Jack burst into the yard with both pistols blazing. He caught one outlaw in the leg, dropping him screaming to the ground. then dove behind the water trough as return fire splintered the wood around him. 3 outlaws left, plus Drummond, who still held Rhea hostage with his gun pressed to her skull. "I know you're in there," Drummond bellowed, dragging Rhea backward toward his horse. "Come out now, or the widow dies. You've got 3 seconds. 1. Rhea's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The cold metal of the gun barrel dug into her skin. 2. She thought of Daniel, of her father, of everyone she'd lost and everything she'd never gotten to say. 3. Rhea moved. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it, didn't do anything except listen to some deep animal instinct that screamed at her to fight or die. Her elbow drove backward into Drummond's ribs with all the force she could muster. His grip loosened, just for a moment, and she tore herself free, throwing herself off the porch and rolling into the dust below. Drummond's gun went off, but the shot went wild, punching into the porch railing where her head had been a half-second before. And then Cole was there. He emerged from the barn like an avenging angel, rifle discarded, pistol in hand, moving with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. His first shot caught Drummond in the shoulder, spinning him around. His second took out one of the remaining outlaws who'd tried to draw a bead on Rhea. Jack was up now, firing from behind the trough, keeping the last 2 outlaws pinned near the fence. Rhea crawled toward the house, her cheek throbbing, her ears ringing, dust coating her tongue. The shotgun, Daniel's shotgun, was just inside the door. She could see it leaning against the wall, exactly where she'd left it. 10 feet, 8, 5. She reached the doorway, grabbed the weapon, whirled back toward the yard, and found herself staring straight into the barrel of a pistol. The outlaw had circled around the house while she wasn't looking. He was young, younger than her, with a scraggly beard and terrified eyes. His gun hand shook, but his finger was on the trigger. "Drop it," he said, his voice cracking. "Drop the gun or I swear to God." Rhea fired. The shotgun's roar was deafening at close range. The kick nearly broke her shoulder. But the outlaw flew backward like he'd been hit by a locomotive, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the sky as he crashed through the porch railing and lay still. She'd killed a man. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She staggered, the shotgun suddenly too heavy to hold, bile rising in her throat. But there was no time to process it, no time to feel anything except the desperate need to survive. She broke open the shotgun, ejected the spent shells, fumbled for fresh ammunition. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped 2 cartridges before managing to reload. By the time she raised the weapon again, it was over. Cole stood in the center of the yard, pistol aimed at the last surviving outlaw, a man on his knees with his hands raised, begging for his life. Jack was already binding Drummond, who lay groaning in the dust, clutching his wounded shoulder. "Please," the kneeling man whimpered. "Please. I'll tell you everything. The hideout, the stolen goods, all of it. Just don't kill me." Cole's expression was stone. His pistol never wavered. "I'm a U.S. Marshal," he said flatly. "I don't execute prisoners." He holstered his weapon, pulled a length of rope from his belt, and began tying the man's hands with practiced efficiency. Rhea lowered the shotgun. Her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps, the worn wood solid beneath her trembling body. It was over. The Drummond gang, terror of 3 territories, murderers of her father, destroyers of her world, was broken. 6 men had ridden in expecting easy prey. 3 were dead. 3 were captured. And she was alive. Against all odds, against every expectation, against the terrible certainty she'd carried in her heart for days, she was alive. Tears began to fall, cutting hot trails through the dust on her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them, didn't have the strength to even try. Cole finished binding the prisoners and walked toward her. His face was streaked with sweat and gun smoke, his shirt torn where a bullet had grazed his arm without his even noticing. But his eyes, those winter blue eyes, were soft with concern. He climbed the porch steps and knelt beside her, his movements slow and careful, like approaching a wounded animal. "Rhea," his voice was gentle. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. "You did well. Better than well." He reached out and touched her shoulder, a brief, tentative contact. You saved my life when Drummond had me pinned. That shot you took gave me the opening I needed. I killed him, she whispered. The one who came around back. I killed him. You defended yourself. There's a difference. Is there? She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much death in too short a time. I pointed a gun at another human being and pulled the trigger. I watched him die. How is that any different from what they do? Cole was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. The difference is in why. They kill for power, for greed, for the pleasure of watching others suffer. You killed to survive, to protect the people and places you love. He met her gaze steadily. There's no sin in defending what's yours, Rhea. Your father knew that. Your husband knew it too. But the guilt will fade. Not completely, maybe, but enough. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. The fact that you feel guilty at all proves you're nothing like them. Men like Drummond don't feel anything when they kill. You do. That's what makes you human. Rhea absorbed this, turning the words over in her mind like stones in a tumbler. She wanted to believe him, wanted desperately to accept the absolution he was offering, but the image of that young outlaw, barely more than a boy really, flying backward with a hole in his chest, that would stay with her forever. Some stains never came out. She'd learned that already. Jack approached, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. Prisoners are secure. Drummond's bleeding pretty good, but he'll live long enough to hang. He paused, studying Rhea with something like admiration. Hell of a shot, ma'am. Remind me never to make you angry. Despite everything, she felt the corner of her mouth twitch. I was aiming for his leg, actually. Jack laughed, a bright, incongruous sound in the aftermath of violence. Even better. Natural talent, then. Cole stood and offered Rhea his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet, and found herself reluctant to let go. His palm was warm and calloused, strong without being crushing. The hand of a man who knew how to hold things gently despite the violence his life demanded. What happens now? She asked. Now I take these men to Tucson for trial. There's a federal judge there who's been waiting a long time to see Silas Drummond in irons. Cole released her hand slowly. Jack will stay here tonight. Make sure no one else comes looking for trouble. By tomorrow, word will spread that the Drummond gang is finished. You should be safe after that. Safe. The word felt foreign. She'd forgotten what safety tasted like. And you? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Will you come back? After the trial? Cole hesitated. Something flickered in his eyes. A war between duty and desire, between the walls he'd built and the woman standing before him. Rhea, you don't have to answer now. She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. I know it's too soon for both of us, but I'll come back. The words hung in the air between them. What? I said I'll come back. Cole's voice was quiet but certain. I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's anything at all, or just two wounded souls finding comfort in shared pain, but I know I'd like to find out. He held her gaze. If you'll let me. Rhea felt something shift inside her chest. A door opening that she'd thought was sealed forever. I'd like that, she whispered. Cole nodded. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached out and took her hand again. This time he raised it to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss against her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, almost courtly, completely at odds with the blood and gun smoke still lingering in the air, and it shook her to her very core. Until I return, then, he said softly. Until you return. He released her and turned toward the prisoners. Jack was already saddling the horses, preparing for the long ride to Tucson. There was work to be done, justice to be served, a world that demanded attention regardless of what tender moments might be blooming on a blood-stained porch. But as Cole walked away, he glanced back over his shoulder one last time, and Rhea saw something in his eyes she hadn't dared to hope for. A promise. The afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the western mountains by the time Cole and Jack finished their preparations. The three prisoners were bound and mounted, Drummond slumped in his saddle, barely conscious from blood loss. The surviving outlaws silent and defeated, All the fight drained out of them. Rhea stood on the porch and watched them go, the bodies of the dead covered with sheets from her linen closet, waiting for burial or burning or whatever the law required. She supposed Cole would send someone to deal with that. She couldn't bring herself to care about the details right now. Jack rode over before they departed, tipping his hat with a grin. "Pleasure meeting you, Mrs. Marston. Try not to shoot anyone else while I'm gone." "No promises." He laughed and spurred his horse forward, joining the procession. Cole lingered a moment longer, his eyes meeting hers across the dusty yard. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Then he turned his horse toward the eastern road, and Rhea watched until the dust cloud swallowed him completely. She stood there for a long time after they'd vanished from sight. The silence that settled over the ranch was different now. Not the oppressive emptiness of grief, but something gentler, something almost like peace. Her father was still dead. Her husband was still gone. The men who'd killed them would face justice, but that wouldn't bring anyone back. And yet, for the first time since Daniel's fever claimed him, Rhea felt the stirring of something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Fragile and uncertain, barely more than a whisper in the darkness of her wounded heart. But there. She went inside and began cleaning the house, washing away the dust and blood of the day, reclaiming the space that had nearly been taken from her. She cooked dinner for one, ate it without tasting, and fell into bed as exhaustion finally claimed her. That night, she dreamed. Not of death this time. Not of gunfire and screaming and her father's blood soaking into the porch boards. She dreamed of a man with winter blue eyes and gentle hands, standing beside her beneath an endless Arizona sky. And when she woke, the dream's warmth lingered like a kiss that hadn't been given yet. The days that followed moved with agonizing slowness. Rhea threw herself into work, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind distracted. She repaired the fence the outlaws had trampled. She cleaned out the barn where Cole had hidden, finding the spent shell casings from his rifle and pocketing them like talismans. She scrubbed the porch until her knuckles bled, and when the blood stain still showed through the wood, she painted the whole thing white. A fresh start. A new beginning. Or at least the attempt at one. Neighbors began to appear. Word had spread through the territory about the Drummond gang's defeat, and suddenly people who'd been too afraid to visit were riding out to pay their respects. The Hendersons from the next ranch over brought a casserole and offered to help with the harvest. Old Mr. Crenshaw from town delivered a letter from the county registrar, confirming that the Marston land deed was secure and uncontested. The pastor's wife came with prayers and platitudes that Rhea accepted with gracious patience she didn't feel. Everyone wanted to know about the marshal. "Is it true he killed 3 men single-handed? I heard he tracked the Drummonds all the way from Colorado. What was he like? Was he handsome? Did he seem interested?" The questions made Rhea uncomfortable. What had passed between her and Cole felt private, too new and tender to be shared with curious strangers, so she deflected and demurred and changed the subject whenever possible. But late at night, alone in her bed, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he'd looked at her when he promised to return. The gentle press of his lips against her hand. The understanding in his voice when he'd spoken of Sarah and Emma. The family he'd lost. The grief he carried like a second skin. He knew her pain because he'd lived it himself. And somehow, impossibly, that knowledge made her feel less alone. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Rhea began to worry. The trial shouldn't take this long, should it? What if something had gone wrong? What if Drummond's men had friends in Tucson, allies who might try to free him before he could hang? What if Cole had been hurt, or worse, and she'd never even know? She was standing at the kitchen window, staring at the eastern road for the 100th time when she saw the dust cloud. Her heart stopped, then started again, hammering so hard she could feel it in her temples. A single rider, approaching slowly, too far away to identify. Rhea forced herself to breathe. It might be anyone. A traveler passing through, a neighbor with news. One of the 100 anonymous people who'd suddenly discovered the Marston Ranch existed now that it was safe to visit. But something in the way the rider sat his horse, straight and steady, moving with that easy confidence she'd noticed the first time they met, told her the truth before her eyes could confirm it. She was on the porch before she'd consciously decided to move, her hand shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Closer, closer. The rider reached the fence line and stopped. For a long moment, he just sat there, looking at the house, looking at her. Then he dismounted and removed his hat. Cole Barron stood in the golden light of a setting sun, his dark hair ruffled by the wind, his face weary but whole. No blood, no bandages. Just a man who'd ridden a long way and was finally home. Except this wasn't his home. Not yet. "You came back," Rhea said, the words barely more than a whisper. "I told you I would." He walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate, giving her time to change her mind, to send him away, to decide that whatever had sparked between them in the crucible of violence was just adrenaline and proximity, nothing real. She didn't move. Cole climbed the porch steps and stopped in front of her. Up close, she could see the new lines around his eyes, the shadows beneath them that spoke of sleepless nights. "The trial?" she asked. "Finished. Drummond hanged yesterday at dawn. The others got 20 years each in the territorial prison." "Good." "Yes." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. "Rhea," Cole's voice was rough. "These past 3 weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Every mile between here and Tucson, you were in my head. Every night when I closed my eyes, I saw your face." "Cole, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I made a promise to myself after Sarah and Emma. I swore I'd never let anyone get close again. Never give fate the chance to take something precious from me a second time. But then I met you, and—" He shook his head. "You broke through walls I didn't even know I'd built. And the worst part is, I'm not sorry about it." Rhea's eyes were stinging. She blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Terrified. My husband has been dead less than 4 months. My father barely 3 weeks. I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or just loneliness, grief, the need to hold on to something living in a world full of death. I know. And even if it is real, even if this is something more than 2 broken people clinging to each other, how do we know it won't end the same way? How do we know we won't wake up one morning and find everything we love torn away again? We don't." Cole reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "We can't know. Life doesn't come with guarantees, Rhea. It never has. All we can do is choose how we face it, alone and afraid, or together and hopeful." "And you're choosing hopeful?" "I'm choosing you." His thumbs brushed the tears from her cheeks. "If you'll have me." She should say no. She knew that. Should tell him it was too soon, that she needed time, that the proper mourning period demanded months or years before she could even think about another man. But proper mourning periods were made by people who'd never stood on a blood-stained porch and watched their entire world collapse in the span of an afternoon. She'd buried her husband, buried her father, killed a man in self-defense, and watched 3 more die in her front yard. She'd faced death and survived, and somewhere in that crucible she'd earned the right to make her own choices, even if those choices didn't make sense to anyone else. "I'm not ready for everything," she said carefully. "I need time. I need to grieve properly, to figure out who I am without them." "I understand. But I don't want you to leave." Cole's eyes softened. "Then I won't." "Stay for dinner? I'm not much of a cook, but Rhea." He smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes and transformed his weathered face. "I'd eat boot leather if it meant sitting across a table from you." She laughed. It bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, surprising them both, a sound she hadn't made in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. "It might come to that, actually. I burned the last pot of beans so badly I had to throw the whole thing out. I've eaten worse. I doubt that. Trust me, you haven't lived until you've tried Jack's trail coffee. I swear he makes it with actual dirt." She laughed again, and this time he joined her, and standing there on the porch in the fading light, surrounded by ghosts and memories and the lingering echo of gunfire, Rhea Marston felt something she'd thought she'd never feel again. Joy. Small and tentative, easily broken, but real. So very painfully real. She took Cole's hand and led him inside, into the house her husband had built and her father had protected and she had fought to keep. The ghosts were still there, Daniel in his reading chair, Thomas at the kitchen table. But they didn't feel angry or betrayed. They felt peaceful, as if they'd been waiting for this, waiting for her to find a reason to keep living. She cooked dinner while Cole sat at the table and told her about the trial, the crowds that had gathered to watch Drummond hang, the cheers that erupted when the trapdoor opened, the strange emptiness that followed justice finally served. She told him about the neighbors who'd visited, the repairs she'd made, the way the ranch was slowly coming back to life. They talked until the candles burned low, sharing stories and silences in equal measure. And when the hour grew late and Cole rose to leave, Rhea walked him to the door with a reluctance she didn't try to hide. "I should find somewhere to make camp," he said. "There's a creek about a mile south." "The barn," she interrupted. "There's a hayloft. It's warm and dry and—" She hesitated. "Close." Cole studied her face, reading between the lines. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I don't want you riding off into the dark when there's a perfectly good roof right here." She managed a small smile. "It's not improper if you're in the barn. At least, that's what I'll tell anyone who asks. And if they don't believe you, then I'll tell them to mind their own business." He laughed softly. "There's that stubborn streak I heard about. It's one of my better qualities." "I believe it." They stood in the doorway, neither wanting to be the first to break the moment. The night air was cool and clear, filled with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes and the gentle breathing of a world that kept turning despite everything. "Good night, Rhea," Cole said softly. "Good night, Cole." He reached out and touched her face, just a brush of fingertips along her cheekbone, light as a butterfly's wing. Then he turned and walked toward the barn, his silhouette dark against the star-scattered sky. Rhea watched until he disappeared inside. Then she closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. He was here. He'd come back. And tomorrow, for the first time in what felt like forever, she had something to look forward to. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Rhea had experienced before. Cole stayed. Not in the house. That would have been improper, and despite her defiant words, she wasn't quite ready to face down the full weight of frontier gossip, but close. He made camp in the barn loft, helped with the morning chores, rode out each afternoon to check on neighboring ranches, and make himself useful to the territory. He was building a reputation, she realized. Not as a marshal anymore. He'd turned in his badge before leaving Tucson, but as a man of character, someone the community could rely on, someone who belonged, someone who wasn't going anywhere. They fell into a rhythm. Breakfast together at dawn, shared over coffee and quiet conversation. Work through the heat of the day, sometimes side by side, sometimes apart. Dinner in the evening, talking until the stars came out. And slowly, carefully, like flowers pushing through soil after a long winter, something began to grow between them. It wasn't passionate, not yet. Rhea wasn't ready for passion, and Cole seemed content to wait. But it was tender, gentle. A courtship conducted in small gestures and soft words, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared pain. He told her about his childhood in Colorado, about the ranch his father had built and lost to debt. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about the day she'd met Daniel at a church social and known immediately that he was the one. He didn't flinch when she spoke of her husband, didn't grow jealous or uncomfortable. He simply listened, asked questions, helped her remember the good times without fearing the comparisons. "He sounds like a good man," Cole said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "He was. The best I'd ever known." Rhea paused. "Until you." Cole turned to look at her. "Rhea, I'm not saying you're replacing him. No one could. But you've shown me that good men still exist, that there's still kindness in the world, even after everything." She reached over and took his hand. "That matters, Cole, more than you know." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I'm not a good man. I've killed people, hurt people, made choices I'm not proud of. So have I. So has everyone who's lived long enough to face hard decisions." She turned to face him fully. "Goodness isn't about being perfect. It's about trying, about getting up every morning and choosing to do right, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something." "Is that what I'm doing? Choosing right?" "Isn't it?" He considered this for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. I spent 6 years running from my grief, hunting outlaws, sleeping on the trail, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I told myself it was about justice, about honoring Sarah and Emma. But the truth is, I was hiding from the memories, from the pain, from the possibility that I might actually heal and have to figure out what came next. And now I'm done running. He met her eyes. I want to stay, Rhea, here, with you. I want to build something real, something that lasts. I want to wake up every morning knowing there's someone waiting for me and go to sleep every night grateful I found her. Rhea's heart swelled so large she thought it might burst. Cole Barron, she whispered, are you asking to court me properly? I am. A hint of nervousness crept into his voice, the first she'd ever heard from this man who'd faced down outlaws without flinching. If you'll permit it. Permit it? She laughed, joy bubbling up through the tears that suddenly blurred her vision. I've been waiting for you to ask for weeks. Is that a yes? That's a yes. His smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. He raised her hand to his lips, that same old-fashioned gesture he'd made the day he left, and pressed a kiss against her knuckles. Then I suppose I'd better start looking for land. Land? Can't court a woman properly without a place to call my own, something close enough to visit regularly, far enough to maintain propriety. His eyes twinkled. I'm told there's a parcel for sale about 10 miles east, good grazing, access to water. The owner's been trying to sell it for months. Rhea stared at him. You've already looked into it. I may have made some inquiries. Cole Barron, you schemer? I prefer planner. He grinned. It's a more respectable word. She shook her head, laughing, overwhelmed by the speed at which her life had changed. 3 months ago, she'd been burying her husband, convinced her story was over. Now she was sitting on her porch with a man who made her heart race, planning a future she'd never dared to imagine. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was everything. 10 miles is a long ride, she said thoughtfully. It is, but I've been told I sit a horse rather well. You'll wear out your welcome visiting every day. I'll take my chances. She leaned closer, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the lines at the corners of his mouth that deepened when he smiled. Then, I suppose, she murmured, you'd better start building. And in that moment, with the setting sun painting the world in shades of gold and the future stretching out before them like an unwritten page, Rhea Marston finally let herself believe. Her story wasn't over. The weeks that followed Cole's declaration unfolded like pages from a story Rhea had never dared to write for herself. Each morning brought new possibilities, each evening new memories to cherish, and somewhere in between, the woman who had buried her husband and father began to remember what it felt like to be alive. Cole purchased the land 10 miles east, just as he'd promised. It was good land, rolling hills of desert grass, a creek that ran clear even in the driest months, a natural windbreak of cottonwood trees that would shelter a house from the worst of the winter storms. He rode out there every few days to survey the property, to plan where the buildings would go, to transform the empty acres into something that might one day be called home. But he always came back to her. That was the miracle Rhea couldn't quite believe, even as the evidence mounted with each passing day. This man, this strong, steady, impossibly gentle man, kept choosing her, kept riding 10 miles through desert heat and winter cold just to share a cup of coffee, to help with her chores, to sit beside her on the porch, and watch the sun paint the sky in colors that seemed too beautiful to be real. She'd stopped questioning it, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, for fate to snatch away this unexpected gift the way it had snatched away everything else. Instead, she simply accepted each day as it came and tried to be grateful for the grace she'd been given. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when everything changed. Rhea was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with hands that had grown stronger over the past months of hard work. The windows were open, letting in the cool autumn breeze, and somewhere outside she could hear Cole splitting wood for the coming winter. The rhythmic thunk of his axe had become one of her favorite sounds, a steady heartbeat that meant safety, that meant she wasn't alone anymore. She was just sliding the loaf pans into the oven when she heard hoofbeats. Not Cole's horse, he was on foot, working behind the barn. These were different. Multiple riders, approaching fast from the south road. Her hand stilled on the oven door. Visitors weren't uncommon anymore. The Drummond gang's defeat had opened the floodgates, and neighbors who'd been too afraid to travel these roads now passed through regularly. But something about the sound of these hoofbeats made her skin prickle with unease. Too fast, too purposeful, like men who knew exactly where they were going and didn't care who heard them coming. Rhea wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. 4 riders had just crested the hill. They weren't dressed like ranchers or travelers. They wore the hard, weathered look of men who lived outside the law, men with guns on their hips and violence in their eyes. And leading them, mounted on a gray stallion that she recognized with a sickening lurch of her stomach, was a face she'd hoped never to see again. Marcus Webb. But that was impossible. Marcus was dead. She'd watched Cole shoot him during the battle, watched him fall outside the barn with a red bloom spreading across his chest. Except the man riding toward her now bore a striking resemblance to the scarred giant who'd scouted her property that terrible day. The same massive build, the same dead eyes, the same sense of barely contained brutality. Not Marcus, she realized with growing horror. His brother. The riders reached the fence line and stopped. The man on the gray stallion, Marcus's brother, if that's who he was, raised one hand in a gesture that might have been peaceful if not for the cold smile twisting his scarred face. "Hello in the house," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the morning air. "We're looking for the widow Marston." Rhea's hand moved instinctively toward Daniel's shotgun, still propped beside the door where she'd kept it since the attack. But she forced herself to stop, to think, to remember that Cole was outside and didn't know what was happening. She needed to warn him. "Who's asking?" she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "Name's Caleb Webb. I believe you knew my brother Marcus." Her stomach dropped. "Your brother was a murderer and a thief. He got what he deserved." Caleb's smile didn't waver. "Maybe so, but see, Mrs. Marston, that's not really the point. The point is, he was family, and where I come from, family means something." He urged his horse forward a few steps. "I've been tracking the man who killed him for 3 months. Trail led me here, to you. The man who killed your brother is a U.S. Marshal. He's not here." "Oh, I know he's not a marshal anymore. Turned in his badge, I hear. Bought some land nearby. Spends most of his time at a certain widow's ranch, helping with chores and such." Caleb's eyes swept the property with predatory interest. "I'm guessing he's somewhere close right now. Probably heard us coming, probably trying to figure out his next move." As if in answer, the sound of splitting wood behind the barn fell silent. Cole had heard. "What do you want?" Rhea demanded, stalling for time. "What I want is simple. I want Cole Barron to step out where I can see him. I want him to drop his weapons and face me like a man, and then I want to put a bullet between his eyes while you watch." Caleb's smile turned cruel. "After that, well, we'll see how charitable I'm feeling." Fear clawed at Rhea's throat, but she forced it down. She'd faced men like this before. She'd survived. She could survive again. "And if I refuse to help you? If I tell you to ride on and never come back? Then my boys will burn this ranch to the ground with you inside it." Caleb's voice was casual, almost bored. "Your choice, Mrs. Marston. Cooperation or cremation. I'm fine either way." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rhea's mind raced. 4 armed men against 1, because even if she grabbed the shotgun, she was hardly a match for professional killers. Cole was behind the barn, probably armed with only an axe. The odds were terrible. But they'd faced terrible odds before. She took a breath and made her decision. "All right," she said, letting her shoulders slump in apparent defeat. "All right, just give me a moment. You need to do nothing except stand there and look pretty." Caleb swung down from his saddle and handed his reins to one of his men. "Jenkins, Carter, circle around back. Make sure our friend doesn't try to slip away. Doyle, watch the front." 2 of the riders spurred their horses toward the barn. Rhea's heart seized. Cole was back there, alone, outnumbered. She had to do something. "Wait!" she cried, stepping onto the porch. "Wait, please. He'll come out. He'll surrender. Just don't hurt him." Caleb paused, studying her with those dead eyes. "You care about him," he observed. The man who killed my brother. You actually care about him. Please. A slow smile spread across his face. Well, well, the widow found herself a new protector. How touching. He mounted the porch steps, his heavy boots thudding against the wood she'd painted white to cover her father's bloodstains. Tell me something, Mrs. Marston. When you look at Cole Barron, do you see a hero? A knight in shining armor who rode in and saved the day? She said nothing. Because I'll tell you what I see. Caleb stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the trail dust and tobacco on his clothes. I see a killer. A man who's left bodies from here to Colorado. A man who hides behind a badge, or used to, so he could murder without consequence. His voice dropped to a whisper. Sound familiar? Sound like someone else you might have known? Cole is nothing like your brother. No, they both carry guns. They both use them on people who get in their way. The only difference is, one had the law on his side and the other didn't. Caleb leaned closer. In my experience, Mrs. Marston, the line between lawman and outlaw is a lot thinner than most folks like to believe. A gunshot shattered the morning air. Rhea flinched. Caleb spun toward the sound, his hand dropping to his pistol. Behind the barn, someone was shouting. Then another shot, and another, and suddenly the air was full of the thunder of gunfire and the screams of men. What the hell? Caleb started. Rhea didn't hesitate. She drove her knee into his groin with every ounce of strength she possessed. Caleb doubled over with a grunt of pain, and she was already moving, lunging for the door, grabbing the shotgun, bringing it around to bear. Caleb recovered faster than she'd expected. He straightened with a snarl and drew his pistol in one fluid motion. Time slowed. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel swing toward her chest, saw death approaching in the fraction of a second it would take for the hammer to fall. She fired first. The shotgun's roar was deafening at close range. Caleb staggered backward, his shirt suddenly red, his face frozen in an expression of absolute surprise. He looked down at his chest, then back up at her, and for a moment something almost like respect flickered in his eyes. Well, he whispered, didn't see that coming. He collapsed on the porch, his pistol clattering from nerveless fingers. Rhea didn't have time to process what she'd done. The battle behind the barn was still raging, and somewhere in that chaos was the man she loved. She broke open the shotgun, reloaded with trembling hands, and ran toward the sound of gunfire. What she found would stay with her for the rest of her life. Cole was pinned behind the woodpile, blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder, his axe abandoned in favor of a pistol he must have had tucked in his belt. One of the riders, Jenkins, she thought, lay motionless in the dirt, clearly dead. The other, Carter, had taken cover behind the corral fence and was methodically firing at Cole's position, each shot sending splinters flying from the logs. Cole saw her coming. His eyes went wide with terror, not for himself, but for her. Rhea, get back! She ignored him. Carter heard her footsteps and spun, his gun tracking toward this new threat. She saw recognition in his eyes. The widow, the one they'd been sent to terrorize. And then something else. Fear. Because the woman running toward him wasn't a helpless victim anymore. She was a survivor, blooded in battle, carrying a shotgun she'd already proven she knew how to use. Carter hesitated. Rhea didn't. The second blast caught him in the side, spinning him around and dropping him in a heap beside the fence. He didn't get up. Silence fell over the ranch. Rhea stood there, breathing hard, the shotgun heavy in her hands, and tried to understand what had just happened. 3 men dead in as many minutes. Caleb on the porch, Jenkins in the dirt, Carter by the fence. 3 men she had helped kill. 3 more ghosts to join the collection already haunting her dreams. Rhea! Cole's voice reached her through the fog of shock. She turned to find him limping toward her, his shoulders soaked with blood, his face pale but his eyes burning with something that looked like awe. Rhea, my God! You're hurt! Her voice came out flat, disconnected from the emotions churning beneath the surface. We need to stop the bleeding. I'm fine. The bullet went clean through. But are you? The 4th one. She looked around suddenly, remembering. There was a 4th rider, Doyle. He was watching the front. They both turned toward the house. Doyle was gone. The hitching post where he'd been stationed was empty. The horses fled in the chaos of gunfire. Either he'd run at the first shot, or he'd been smart enough to recognize a losing battle and cut his losses. He'll bring more, Cole said grimly. Men like Caleb Webb always have friends. Then let them come. The words surprised them both. Rhea looked down at her hands, steady now. The trembling faded, and felt something harden inside her. I'm done running, Cole. Done hiding. Done letting men like them dictate what I can and cannot have. She met his eyes. This is my home. You are my future, and I will fight for both until there's nothing left of me to fight with. Cole stared at her for a long moment. Then, despite the blood loss and the pain and the body's cooling in the morning sun, he smiled. Have I mentioned that I love you? The words hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught. Her heart stuttered. What? I love you, Rhea Marston. I've loved you since you pointed that shotgun at me the first day we met. He reached out with his good arm and cupped her face. I should have said it sooner. Should have said it 100 times by now. But I was scared. Scared that if I admitted how much you meant to me, fate would find a way to take you too. Tears blurred her vision. Cole, I'm done being scared. Life is too short, too fragile, too precious to waste on fear. His thumb brushed away the tear that escaped down her cheek. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want... She kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't careful, wasn't anything like the tender courtship they'd been conducting for months. It was desperate and fierce and tasted of blood and gun smoke and all the terrible, beautiful chaos of being alive. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for breath, Cole's smile had turned slightly dazed. So that's a yes? He managed. That's a yes to everything, she whispered. Everything you want, everything you are, everything we could be together. Even the hard parts, the danger, the fact that men like Caleb Webb might keep coming? Especially those parts. She pressed her forehead against his. I'd rather face 100 enemies at your side than spend one more day alone and safe. He laughed, a raw, joyful sound that seemed utterly out of place amid the carnage surrounding them. You're remarkable, Rhea. Has anyone ever told you that? Not recently. Then I'll tell you every day for the rest of our lives. He kissed her again, softer this time. But right now, we should probably deal with... He gestured vaguely at the bodies. Right. Yes. That's probably important. They turned to survey the battlefield they'd created together. 3 dead men, 1 escaped. A ranch that would need to be scrubbed clean, again, of blood and violence. I'm getting really tired of painting this porch, Rhea muttered. Cole choked on a laugh. I'll help. After we get me stitched up. Your shoulder. I forgot. She immediately went into practical mode, the shock fading in favor of the determination that had kept her alive through worse. Inside, now. I've got clean bandages and whiskey for the pain. Whiskey sounds good. The whiskey is for the wound, not for drinking. Can it be both? Despite everything, the death, the fear, the lingering adrenaline, Rhea felt herself smile. I suppose it can be both. She helped him inside, settled him at the kitchen table, and began the grim work of cleaning and binding his wound. The bullet had indeed gone clean through, missing anything vital, but he'd lost blood and would need rest. She told him so in no uncertain terms. Rest, he repeated skeptically. There are 3 bodies in my yard and a 4th man riding to who knows where to gather reinforcements. This doesn't seem like the time for rest. The bodies aren't going anywhere. Neither are you until I'm satisfied you're not going to bleed out. You're very bossy when you're worried. I'm bossy all the time, you just haven't noticed. He caught her hand as she worked, stilling her movements. Rhea, look at me. She met his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly, for saving my life. Again. You've saved mine twice now. We're not even close to even. That's not how it works. No? No. His grip tightened on her fingers. We're not keeping score. We're building a life. In that life, sometimes I'll protect you, and sometimes you'll protect me, and sometimes we'll stand back to back against whatever the world throws at us. That's what partnership means. She blinked rapidly, fighting back another wave of tears. When did you become so wise? Probably around the time a beautiful widow taught me that love was worth fighting for. Flatterer. Truth teller. He released her hand. Now finish patching me up so we can deal with those bodies before they start attracting coyotes. She did as he asked, working quickly and efficiently despite the tremor in her fingers. By the time she'd finished, the whiskey bottle was half empty and Cole's color had improved considerably. Drink, she said, pushing a glass of water toward him. You need fluids. Yes, ma'am. She left him there and went outside to assess the damage. The morning sun had climbed higher, bathing the ranch in golden light that seemed utterly at odds with the violence it illuminated. Caleb Webb lay where he'd fallen on the porch, his eyes open and staring at the sky. She forced herself to look at him, really look, and feel the weight of what she'd done. She'd taken a life, deliberately, consciously, in full awareness of the consequences. Not in the heat of battle, the way she'd killed that young outlaw during the Drummond attack, but with cold calculation. She'd seen the threat, assessed it, and eliminated it. Like a soldier, like a killer. The thought should have horrified her. Instead, she felt only a strange, quiet acceptance. This was who she was now. A woman who could defend her home, her heart, her future. A woman who wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger when the people she loved were in danger. She wasn't proud of it. But she wasn't ashamed either. It simply was. She covered Caleb's body with a tarp and moved on to the others. By the time Cole emerged from the house, his arm in a makeshift sling, she'd dragged all 3 corpses to a shaded spot near the barn where they'd be easier to transport. You shouldn't be lifting anything with that shoulder, she said when she saw him. You shouldn't be moving bodies alone. I'm stronger than I look. I know. His voice was soft. I've known that since the day we met. They stood together in the aftermath, surveying the work still to be done. The bodies would need to be taken to the sheriff in town. Rhea had no intention of burying murderers on her land, not even in unmarked graves. The horses had scattered, but would probably return once they calmed down. The blood, well, the blood would fade eventually. Everything faded eventually. We need to talk about Doyle, Cole said finally. The one who got away. I know. If he rides to Webb's people, and Caleb definitely had people, they'll come for us. Could be days, could be weeks. But they'll come. I know. We could leave. Head east the way you'd planned before I showed up. Start over somewhere nobody knows our names. Rhea considered this. It was the smart move. The safe move. The move that made sense when you weighed the risks against the rewards. No, she said quietly. No? This is my home, Cole. My husband built it. My father died defending it. I nearly lost my own life on this ground more than once. She turned to face him. I'm not giving it up. Not for Caleb Webb's friends. Not for anyone. They might come with more men next time. A lot more. Then we'll need more guns. Cole raised an eyebrow. You have a plan? The beginning of one. She smiled grimly. Remember how you said word spread about the Drummond gang's defeat? How neighbors who'd been afraid suddenly started showing up? I remember. Well, Silas Drummond terrorized this territory for years. He hurt a lot of people, killed some, stole from others. Those people remember what he did to them, and they remember who stopped him. Understanding dawned in Cole's eyes. You want to raise a militia. I want to give people a chance to fight back, against Webb's men, against anyone else who thinks they can ride into this valley and take whatever they want. She straightened her shoulders. This is a community, Cole. These are good people, ranchers and farmers and shopkeepers who just want to live in peace. If we stand together, we don't have to be afraid anymore. It's risky. Some of them might refuse. Some might even side with Webb if they think that's the winning play. Maybe. But I don't think so. She took his good hand in hers. You showed me what one man with courage can accomplish. Imagine what a dozen could do. 2 dozen. More. Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. You really have changed, haven't you? Since that first day on the porch. I had a good teacher. I didn't teach you this. This is all you. Then I suppose I'm finally becoming the person I was meant to be. She squeezed his hand. With your help. With your love. With everything you've given me that I never thought I'd have again. He pulled her close, carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder, and held her tight. I love you, Rhea Marston. I love you too, Cole Barron. They stood there in the ruins of another battle, surrounded by death and the promise of more to come, and somehow, impossibly, found peace. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Cole rode to town despite Rhea's protests about his shoulder, returning with the sheriff in a wagon to collect the bodies. Questions were asked, statements were given, and by the end of it, their actions had been ruled justified self-defense. Caleb Webb and his men were wanted criminals. The sheriff produced papers to prove it, and their deaths would earn Cole and Rhea a modest bounty they immediately used to purchase additional ammunition and supplies. Word spread quickly. By the second day, neighbors were arriving to offer support. The Hendersons brought food and news of other ranchers willing to join a mutual defense pact. Old Mr. Crenshaw closed his general store for an afternoon to ride out and pledge his hunting rifle to whatever cause they were building. Even the pastor's wife, a woman Rhea had always considered too delicate for frontier life, appeared with a determined glint in her eye and the surprising revelation that she was a crack shot with a pistol. My father was a Confederate sharpshooter, she explained when she saw their astonished expressions. He taught me before I could read. Within a week, they had 17 people committed to the cause. Ranchers and townfolk, men and women, young and old. Not a militia in any official sense. No uniforms, no ranks, no formal training, but a community united by shared history and common purpose. They called themselves the Valley Watch. It was Jack's idea, delivered via telegram from Tucson, where he'd gone to pursue his own career as a lawman. If you're going to fight, he wrote, you might as well have a name that sounds impressive, scares the bad guys, and attracts the good ones. Cole read the telegram aloud at their first official gathering, held in the Marston barn because it was the only building large enough to fit everyone. Laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous laughter, but genuine. The Valley Watch, Cole repeated, trying the words on his tongue. I suppose it does have a certain ring to it. Better than Cole's crazies, Mr. Henderson called out, which is what my wife has been calling us. More laughter. The tension in the room eased slightly. Rhea stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. Thank you all for coming, she said. I know this isn't easy. Most of you have families to protect, livestock to tend, lives that don't include standing guard against outlaws. But the truth is, we've been protecting ourselves alone for too long. We've been living in fear, hoping the next gang would pass us by, praying we wouldn't be the ones chosen for violence. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the faces of her neighbors, people she'd known for years but never truly understood until now. That changes today. From now on, we stand together. We watch each other's backs. We send riders to warn of approaching strangers and gather to defend whoever needs defending. Her voice strengthened. This is our valley, our home, and we will not surrender it to anyone. Silence. Then slowly, someone began to clap. It was old Mr. Crenshaw, his weathered hands coming together in a steady rhythm. Others joined him. The Hendersons, the pastor's wife. One by one, the people of the valley rose to their feet and applauded the woman who had once been a helpless widow and was now something else entirely. A leader. Rhea felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. Now wasn't the time for emotion. Now was the time for action. Cole will handle training, she continued once the applause faded. He's got more experience with firearms and tactics than anyone else here. Those of you who can spare time will ride patrol routes along the main roads. Those who can't will signal with lanterns if they see trouble. We'll create a web of communication across the valley so no attack can catch us off guard. And when the next attack comes? Someone asked from the back of the room. When it comes, Rhea said firmly, we'll be ready. The meeting broke up into smaller discussions. Schedules, routes, equipment. Cole moved among the groups, answering questions and offering advice with the easy authority of a man who'd spent his life in situations like this. Rhea watched him work, marveling at how naturally he slipped into the role of teacher and tactician. This was what he was meant to do, she realized. Not just hunting outlaws one by one, but building something larger. A community that could protect itself. A legacy that would outlast any single confrontation. And he was doing it with her. As the last of the neighbors departed, their horses clattering down the road in the fading evening light, Cole came to stand beside her on the porch. You were magnificent in there, he said quietly. I was terrified. Doesn't matter. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. He smiled. Someone told me that once. Sounds like a wise person. The wisest I've ever known. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the valley they'd just sworn to protect. Somewhere out there, Doyle was riding toward Webb's allies. Somewhere out there, enemies were gathering. But here, on this porch, beside this man, Rhea felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the fragile, uncertain hope she'd clung to in the early days after the Drummond attack. This was something stronger, something forged in fire and tempered by loss. Hope that had been tested and survived. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked. "I'm thinking that 6 months ago, I was standing in this exact spot, ready to run away from everything I'd ever known, ready to give up. And now? Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." She turned to face him. "This is where I belong, Cole. With you. With these people. Fighting for something worth fighting for." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "I was going to wait," he said softly, "until the house was finished, until things were more settled. But after today, after watching you rally an entire valley to our cause, I can't wait anymore." Rhea's breath caught. "Cole, what are you—" He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, something that caught the last light of the dying sun and sparkled like a fallen star. "A ring. I bought this in Tucson," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The day after Drummond hanged. I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. I was waiting for the right moment. And this is it? Covered in gun smoke, standing on a porch I've had to repaint twice? This is it." He sank to one knee, his injured shoulder protesting but his gaze never wavering. "Rhea Marston, you are the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You faced down outlaws with a shotgun. You rallied a community with your words. You looked at a broken man and saw something worth loving." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. "Will you marry me?" Cole asked. "Will you let me spend every day of my remaining years trying to be worthy of you?" She could barely breathe, could barely think, could barely do anything except stare at this man kneeling before her, his heart open and vulnerable, offering her everything she'd thought she'd lost forever. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." She pulled him to his feet, carefully, always careful of that shoulder, and kissed him with everything she had. All the love, all the fear, all the desperate, overwhelming joy of finding hope again when she'd thought hope was gone forever. When they finally broke apart, Cole slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. "I love you," she breathed. "I love you too." He pressed his forehead to hers. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone again." They stood there on the porch, two survivors clinging to each other as twilight settled over the valley, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. Let the enemies come, Rhea thought. Let them bring their guns and their grudges and their thirst for vengeance. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had something worth fighting for. And she would defend it until her last breath. The engagement ring on Rhea's finger caught the morning light as she poured coffee into two chipped ceramic cups, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the kitchen wall. She paused to admire it for the 100th time since Cole had slipped it onto her hand 3 days ago, still marveling at how something so small could carry so much weight. Not the weight of the gold and the modest diamond, but the weight of promise, of commitment, of a future she'd stopped believing in and somehow found again. Cole came through the back door, stamping dust from his boots. His shoulder nearly healed now, though he still favored it unconsciously. He caught her staring at the ring and smiled that quiet smile she'd come to love, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made her heart skip like a schoolgirl's. "Still there?" he asked, crossing to accept the coffee she offered. "Still there. I keep checking to make sure I didn't dream it." "You didn't." He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a gesture so natural now that she couldn't remember a time when it hadn't been part of her mornings. "Though if you had, it would have been a good dream. The best." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, standing side by side at the window that looked out over the property. The ranch had transformed over the past weeks, subtle changes that spoke of life returning to land that had known too much death. New fence posts replaced the ones damaged in the attack. The barn door hung straight on fresh hinges. Even the porch, repainted for the third time, gleamed white in the early sun. But the most significant change wasn't visible from this window. Cole's land, 10 miles to the east, had begun its own transformation. The foundation for a house had been laid. Walls were rising. A future was taking shape, board by board and nail by nail, built by Cole's own hands, and the help of neighbors who'd become something more than acquaintances, friends, family, almost. The Valley Watch had held strong through the tense weeks following Caleb Webb's death. Patrol routes were established, warning systems put in place. Every stranger who passed through the territory was noted, reported, assessed for potential threat. So far there had been nothing, no sign of Doyle, no indication that Webb's people were regrouping for revenge, but Rhea knew better than to mistake silence for safety. "The Henderson boys spotted riders yesterday," she said, breaking the quiet. "Coming in from the south. 3 of them." Cole's expression didn't change, but she felt him tense beside her. "Description?" "Couldn't get close enough. They stopped at the creek, watered their horses, and moved on, headed west, toward the mountains. Could be travelers. Could be scouts." "Could be." She set down her cup. "I don't like it, Cole. 3 weeks with nothing, and now suddenly there's movement." "I don't like it either." He turned to face her fully. "Which is why I've been thinking." "About?" "About finishing the house faster. Getting you moved in. Getting us married." Rhea blinked. "I thought we were waiting until spring. You said the house wouldn't be ready until—" "I know what I said, but spring is 5 months away, and a lot can happen in 5 months." He took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "The walls are up. The roof is half done. Give me 2 more weeks, and I can have it livable. Not perfect, not finished, but livable. A place we can defend together. You want to rush the wedding? I want to stop waiting for the perfect moment and start living the life we've earned." His voice dropped. "I've lost too much time already, Rhea. Lost too many years to grief and hunting and running from everything that mattered. I don't want to waste another day." She understood. God, did she understand? The fear of loss that made every moment precious. The knowledge that tomorrow wasn't promised to anyone. 2 weeks, she repeated slowly. 2 weeks. Then we get married, move into the house, and start the rest of our lives. His eyes searched hers. "Unless you want to wait. Unless you need more time." Did she? She'd been a widow for less than a year. Proper mourning demanded at least 12 months of black dresses and social seclusion. Proper behavior required her to wait, to grieve visibly, to show the world that she respected her late husband's memory. But proper behavior hadn't saved Daniel from the fever, hadn't protected her father from Drummond's bullet, hadn't kept any of the people she loved safe from the cruelties of a world that didn't care about rules or expectations. "I don't want to wait," she said firmly. "I don't want to waste another day either." Cole's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then we'd better get to work." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Cole labored from dawn to dusk on the house. His hands blistered and his muscles aching, but his spirits higher than Rhea had ever seen them. She rode out every day to help where she could, holding boards steady while he hammered, handing up shingles for the roof, learning the satisfaction of building something real and lasting with her own 2 hands. Neighbors came and went, offering assistance and receiving it in turn. The Valley Watch had created bonds that went deeper than mere mutual protection. These were people who'd chosen to stand together, and that choice had transformed acquaintances into something approaching kin. Mrs. Henderson appointed herself in charge of wedding preparations, sweeping into Rhea's kitchen one morning with fabric samples and menu suggestions and a list of questions that left Rhea's head spinning. "Flowers? What flowers are you thinking? The wild roses should still be blooming if we're lucky, but we might need to supplement with Martha." Rhea held up her hand. "Please, I appreciate the help, truly I do, but I don't need a grand affair. Just Cole, me, and whoever wants to witness." Martha looked scandalized. You're marrying a hero, the man who saved our valley. You can't just mumble some vows in a barn and call it done. It's not about the ceremony, it's about the commitment. Of course, it's about the commitment, but that doesn't mean you can't also have a proper wedding. Martha's expression softened. Dear, I know you've been through more than most people could survive. I know you're used to doing things alone, making do with what you have, but you're not alone anymore. Let us celebrate with you. Let us show you how much your happiness means to this community. Rhea felt something loosen in her chest. She'd spent so long guarding herself, protecting her heart from further damage, that she'd almost forgotten how to accept kindness without suspicion. All right, she said softly. Nothing too elaborate, but all right, Martha beamed. You won't regret it. I promise. The days counted down like heartbeats. Cole finished the roof on a Thursday. The last shingle hammered into place as the sun dipped below the horizon. He stood on the ladder and looked out over his land, their land now, and Rhea saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. What is it? She asked from below. Nothing. Just remembering. She didn't press. She knew what he was remembering, the house in Colorado that had burned to the ground, the family he'd lost, the home that had become a grave. This is different, she said quietly. This is a beginning, not an ending. He climbed down and pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest. I know, that's what makes it hard. Hope is harder than grief sometimes. I know. They stood there in the gathering dark, two people who understood each other's pain because they'd lived through the same fires and found comfort in the simple fact of not being alone. The wedding was set for Sunday. On Saturday morning, Rhea woke to the sound of hoofbeats. She was out of bed before her eyes fully opened, her hand reaching for the shotgun that had become her constant companion. Through the bedroom window, she saw a single rider approaching from the east, from the direction of Cole's land, moving fast. Too fast. She was on the porch by the time the rider reached the gate. It was the Henderson boy, barely 16, his horse lathered and blowing, his face pale with fear. Mrs. Marston, they're coming! Rhea's blood turned to ice. Who's coming? How many? I don't know, a lot. I saw them from the ridge. They're headed for Mr. Barron's place. The words tumbled out in a breathless rush. Ma sent me to warn you. She's riding to town for help. Cole's place, where he'd slept last night, wanting to finish some final detail before the wedding, where he was right now, alone and unaware. How far out? Maybe an hour, maybe less. Mrs. Marston, there's so many of them. Ride to the Crenshaw Ranch. Tell them to gather everyone they can and meet me at Cole's property. Go. Now. The boy wheeled his horse and galloped away. Rhea was dressed and saddled in 5 minutes. She pushed her mare harder than she'd ever pushed a horse before, the wind stinging her eyes and tearing at her hair as she raced toward the man she loved. Please, she prayed, please let me be in time. The new house came into view just as she heard the gunfire. It was a siege. A dozen men, maybe more, had surrounded Cole's property, using the half-built outbuildings as cover while they fired at the main house. She could see muzzle flashes from the windows where Cole had barricaded himself, returning fire with the desperation of a man who knew he was outgunned and outnumbered. Rhea didn't hesitate. She angled her horse toward the creek bed that ran along the eastern edge of the property, using the natural depression for cover as she approached from a direction the attackers weren't watching. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her teeth, but her hands were steady on the reins. She'd done this before. She could do it again. The creek bed brought her within 50 yards of the house. From here, she could see the attackers more clearly, hard men in trail-worn clothes firing with the disciplined patience of professionals. These weren't common outlaws. These were hired guns, brought in to finish what Caleb Webb had started. And in the middle of them, directing the assault from horseback, she saw a face she recognized. Doyle, the one who'd escaped, the one who'd ridden off to gather reinforcements. He'd found them, clearly. Found them and brought them here on the eve of her wedding, determined to destroy her happiness one more time. Rage flooded through her, hot and bright and clarifying. She checked her shotgun, confirmed it was loaded, and slipped from her horse. She moved through the tall grass like a ghost, keeping low, using every scrap of cover the terrain offered. The attackers were focused on the house. None of them were watching their flanks. A mistake born of arrogance, of assumption that one man couldn't hold them off forever. They didn't know about her. They were about to learn. Rhea reached the nearest outbuilding, a half-finished storage shed, and pressed her back against the rough boards. Two attackers crouched nearby, reloading their rifles, exchanging words she couldn't quite hear. She raised the shotgun, took a breath, and stepped around the corner. The first man never even saw her. The blast caught him square in the back, dropping him like a puppet with cut strings. The second spun, his eyes going wide with shock, but his rifle was empty and his hands were too slow. Rhea didn't give him time to reload. The second shot took him in the chest. He fell beside his companion, their blood mingling in the Arizona dust. Shouts of alarm rose from the other attackers. Doyle's voice cut through the chaos, screaming orders, trying to regain control of a situation that had suddenly shifted. Rhea was already moving. She ran for the house, zigzagging to throw off anyone trying to draw a bead on her. Bullets kicked up dirt at her feet. Something tugged at her sleeve, a near miss that would leave a bruise but nothing worse. She didn't slow down. The front door was barricaded, but a window on the east side had been left unboarded. She dove through it head first, landing hard on the wooden floor, her shotgun clattering beside her. "Rhea!" Cole was there, pulling her to her feet, his face streaked with sweat and gun smoke. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were bright and alert. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Saving your life." Again. She grabbed her shotgun and moved to a window. "How many?" 15, maybe. They hit at dawn. I barely had time to—" A bullet smashed through the wall inches from his head. "Down!" They hit the floor together as a volley of gunfire tore through the house, shattering windows and splintering wood. Rhea covered her head, felt Cole's body shield hers, and waited for the storm to pass. When it did, she raised her head. "We need help." "I sent the Henderson boy to rally the watch." "How long?" "I don't know. An hour, maybe more." "We don't have an hour." Cole crawled to the window and risked a quick look. "They're regrouping. Doyle's smart. He'll try to flank us, smoke us out, something. We can't hold this position forever." "Then we don't hold it." Rhea's mind raced. "The root cellar. You said you built one?" "It's not finished." "Is there an exit?" Cole's eyes widened. "A tunnel. For ventilation. It comes out near the creek." "Then we run. Get to the creek, get to cover, hold out until help arrives." "Rhea, there's 15 of them out there. And there's 2 of us in here. Those are better odds on the move than pinned down." She grabbed his arm. "I didn't ride across the valley to watch you die, Cole Barron. Not today. Not on the day before our wedding." Something flickered in his eyes. Admiration, maybe. Or love. Or both. "The cellar door is in the kitchen." They moved. The house was a maze of half-finished rooms, but Cole knew every inch of it. He led her through the chaos of construction debris and bullet holes to a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. Below, rough-cut steps descended into darkness. "I'll go first," he said. "There might be—" "We go together." She took his hand. "Always together." He squeezed her fingers once, hard, and they descended into the dark. The root cellar was damp and cool, smelling of fresh-turned earth and raw timber. Rhea could barely see her hand in front of her face, but Cole moved with confidence, guiding her toward a narrow opening in the far wall. "The tunnel's tight," he warned, "and dark. Stay close." "I'm not going anywhere." They crawled through the tunnel on hands and knees, the earth pressing in around them, the sounds of gunfire fading to distant pops above their heads. Rhea forced herself to breathe slowly, to focus on Cole's boots ahead of her, to ignore the primal terror of being buried alive. After what felt like an eternity, she saw light. The tunnel emerged in a tangle of brush near the creek bank, hidden from casual view by thick vegetation. Cole climbed out first, then turned to help her, his hands strong and sure as he pulled her into the daylight. "Stay low," he murmured. "The creek runs west for about a quarter-mile before it hits open ground. If we can—" "There!" The shout came from above them, from the ridge overlooking the creek. One of Doyle's men had spotted their escape. "Run!" They ran. The creek bed became their highway, the water splashing around their ankles as they sprinted downstream. Bullets cracked overhead, tearing through branches and kicking up spray. Rhea heard hoofbeats, riders pursuing from the ridge, angling to cut them off. "The bend!" Cole shouted. "There's cover at the bend." She saw it. A tumble of boulders where the creek curved sharply, creating a natural fortress. They threw themselves behind the rocks as another volley of gunfire tore through the space they'd occupied a second before. Cole checked his pistol. 6 rounds. You? Shotgun's empty. I've got a pistol, too. She pulled the small revolver from her belt. 5 shots. 11 rounds between us. Against how many? Too many. He laughed, a raw, desperate sound that shouldn't have been funny but somehow was. Story of my life. Our life, she corrected, if we get through this. When? He said firmly. When we get through this. The riders had reached the ridge above them. Rhea counted 5, spreading out to surround their position. More were coming on foot. She could hear them crashing through the brush downstream. They were trapped. Cole? Her voice was steady, but her heart was breaking. If this is the end, it's not. But if it is, I want you to know, Rhea. He turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. It's not the end. Not today. Not ever. I didn't survive everything I've survived just to die in a creek bed the day before I marry the woman I love. Tears blurred her vision. You can't promise that. Watch me. He kissed her, hard and fierce and full of everything they might never get to say. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing with a determination that bordered on madness. On my signal, he said, you run upstream, back toward the house. The watch should be arriving soon. You'll meet them halfway. And you? I'll hold them here. Buy you time. No. She grabbed his arm. I told you, we go together, always together. Rhea, I'm not leaving you, Cole. I don't care what happens. I don't care if we die in this creek surrounded by enemies. I'm not leaving you alone. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then slowly, his expression softened into something that looked almost like peace. All right, he whispered. Together then. They turned to face the approaching enemy, shoulders touching, weapons raised. And then, impossibly, they heard it. Gunfire, but not aimed at them. Distant shouts of alarm, the thunder of hoofbeats, not from the ridge above, but from the west. The Valley Watch had arrived. Rhea saw them pouring over the hill like a cavalry charge. Henderson and Crenshaw and a dozen others, rifles blazing, driving into Doyle's men with the fury of people defending their own. The attackers who'd been closing in on the creek scattered, caught between two forces. Their advantage suddenly evaporated. Now, Cole shouted. Move! They scrambled from behind the boulders and ran upstream toward the fight, toward their people. Rhea saw Doyle on the ridge, saw him raise his pistol, saw him draw a bead on Cole's back. She didn't think, she just acted. Her last shot caught Doyle in the shoulder, spinning him sideways, ruining his aim. His bullet went wide, burying itself harmlessly in the creek bank. He screamed, more rage than pain, and tried to bring his weapon around again. He never got the chance. Old Mr. Crenshaw's rifle spoke once, cleanly, and Doyle tumbled from his horse and lay still. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. Without their leader, the hired guns lost whatever cohesion they'd possessed. Some surrendered immediately. Others tried to flee and were run down by the watch. By the time the dust settled, 8 men were dead, 5 were captured, and 2 had escaped into the mountains to spread the word that the valley was no longer easy pickings. Rhea stood in the aftermath, covered in creek water and dust and the residue of violence, and watched Cole embrace the neighbors who'd saved their lives. Henderson was slapping him on the back. Crenshaw was actually crying, tears cutting clean tracks through the gun smoke on his weathered cheeks. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. Cole turned and saw her watching. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. You saved my life, he murmured into her hair. Again. You keep putting it in danger. Someone has to. He laughed, a real laugh this time, full of joy and relief and the giddy euphoria of survival. Marry me tomorrow. That was already the plan. I know. I just wanted to say it again. He set her down but didn't let go. Marry me tomorrow, Rhea Marston. Marry me and never let me go. She looked up at him. This man who'd ridden into her life and refused to leave, who'd fought beside her and bled for her and loved her despite every reason not to. I already said yes, she whispered, Say it again. Yes. She kissed him softly. Yes. 1,000 times yes. The sun climbed higher over the valley, burning away the lingering smoke of battle, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark began to sing. Tomorrow, they would be married. Today, they had survived. And that, Rhea thought, was more than enough. The wedding took place at sunset, beneath the old oak tree on the ridge overlooking both properties. It was the tree where Cole had planned to build a swing for the children they might someday have. The tree that had witnessed their first kiss after the battle with Caleb Webb, that had sheltered their quiet conversations and stolen moments throughout the whirlwind of their courtship. It seemed fitting that it would witness this too. Rhea wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved through all the years and all the moves, altered to fit by Mrs. Henderson's skilled hands. The ivory silk had yellowed slightly with age, but the lace was still beautiful, still delicate, still carrying the echo of another woman's hope for the future. Cole wore a new suit, his only suit, purchased in town with money he'd earned from the bounty on Caleb Webb's head. He stood beneath the oak's spreading branches, watching her walk toward him, and she saw his eyes glistening in the golden light. The pastor spoke words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Rhea heard them dimly, as if from a great distance, her attention focused entirely on the man before her. This man who had saved her. This man she had saved in return. This man who had shown her that endings were not always endings, that sometimes, just sometimes, they were beginnings in disguise. Do you, Cole Barron, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Rhea Marston, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She looked into his eyes, those winter blue eyes that had become her whole world, and felt the last of her grief release its hold on her heart. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Cole kissed her as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their neighbors cheered. Jack, who'd arrived from Tucson just in time, whistled loudly enough to startle birds from the branches above. And Rhea kissed him back, tasting joy and promise, and the sweet certainty of a future she'd finally allowed herself to believe in. They were married. After everything, after the death and the fear and the violence that had nearly consumed them both, they were married. The celebration that followed was simple but heartfelt. Lanterns hung from the oak tree's branches, casting warm light over tables laden with food the neighbors had prepared. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else. A guitar. Music filled the evening air, and couples began to dance beneath the stars. Cole took her hand and led her onto the impromptu dance floor, his movements surprisingly graceful for a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. You're full of surprises, she murmured as he spun her gently. I learned to dance in Colorado. Sarah insisted. He paused at the mention of his first wife's name, but there was no pain in it now, just memory, just gratitude. She said every man should know how to waltz, that it was a sign of civilization. She sounds like she was wise. She was. Cole pulled her closer. She would have liked you, I think. You're alike in some ways, stubborn, strong, unwilling to accept anything less than you deserve. I hope I've measured up. Rhea. He stopped dancing and cupped her face in his hands. You haven't measured up. You've exceeded every expectation, every hope, every dream I was afraid to have. His voice dropped to a whisper. You've given me back my life, my future, everything I thought I'd lost forever. How could you possibly think you've only measured up? Tears spilled down her cheeks. Happy tears for once. Tears of joy instead of grief. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. He kissed her forehead. Mrs. Barron. The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Barron, Cole's wife, a woman with a new name and a new life and a future stretching out before her like an endless summer. They danced until the moon rose high above the valley. They ate and laughed and accepted the congratulations of friends who'd become family. And when the last guest had departed, when the lanterns had burned down to embers and the night had grown quiet and still, Cole lifted her in his arms and carried her across the threshold of the house he'd built for her. Their house. Their home. Their beginning. The years that followed their wedding night unfolded like seasons turning, each one bringing its own joys and challenges, its own triumphs and trials. Rhea watched the house transform around her. Rooms added as needs grew, porches expanded, a garden planted where once there had been only dust and wild grass. The first spring brought rain so heavy the creek overflowed its banks, flooding the lower pasture and forcing them to work side by side for 3 days straight, building levees and moving livestock to higher ground. They collapsed into bed each night exhausted and muddy, too tired even to speak, but Rhea had never felt more alive. This was what marriage meant, she realized, not just the tender moments and whispered promises, but the hard work of building something that would last. The Valley Watch disbanded gradually as the threat of Webb's remaining allies faded into memory. The last of the hired guns had been captured or killed within months of the wedding, and the word had spread through the territory's criminal underworld that this valley was not worth the trouble. The ranchers and farmers returned to their individual lives, though the bonds forged in those dangerous days remained strong. Neighbors helped neighbors without being asked. Doors stayed unlocked. Children played together on shared land. It was the kind of community Rhea had always dreamed of, but never believed she'd find. Cole continued to build, not just their house, but a reputation as a man who could be trusted. He served as an unofficial mediator for disputes between ranchers, his experience as a lawman giving him credibility that his quiet demeanor reinforced. He never sought the role, but people came to him anyway, and he never turned them away. "You miss it," Rhea said one evening, watching him read a letter from Jack about some trouble brewing in Tucson. The badge. The work. Cole considered the question carefully before answering. "I miss the purpose, the feeling that I was making a difference." "You are making a difference, here, with these people." "I know." He set down the letter and pulled her close. "But it's not the same. Being a marshal it was who I was for so long. Sometimes I wake up and forget I'm not that person anymore." "You're still that person. You've just found a new way to be him." He kissed her temple. "How did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." Summer brought heat so intense the air shimmered like water over the desert floor. Rhea spent long hours in her garden, coaxing vegetables from soil that seemed determined to reject anything green. She'd never had much talent for growing things before, but she discovered a patience she hadn't known she possessed. The willingness to nurture something day after day, trusting that eventually it would flourish, like her marriage, like herself. The nightmares came less frequently now. She still dreamed sometimes of Daniel's face, pale and fevered in the lamplight. Still saw her father falling on the porch, blood blooming across his chest. Still heard the roar of gunfire and smelled the copper tang of violence. But she also dreamed of other things, of Cole's hands on her skin, of laughter around a dinner table, of children running through fields of golden grass, dreams of the future instead of the past. It was during the second autumn of their marriage that Rhea realized she was pregnant. She hadn't told Cole yet, wanted to be certain before she spoke the words aloud, but her body knew. The morning sickness, the tenderness, the bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. All the signs her mother had described years ago, when Rhea was too young to understand what they meant. She was carrying Cole's child, their child, a new life growing inside her, proof that love could create as well as destroy. She waited until evening to tell him, when the day's work was done, and they sat together on the porch watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Cole had built a swing for them, the swing he'd once planned to hang from the oak tree, and they rocked gently in the cooling air, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Cole." "I have something to tell you." He turned to look at her, his brow creasing with concern. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She took his hand and placed it on her belly. "Something's very, very right." For a moment, he didn't understand. She watched realization dawn across his face, the widening eyes, the sharp intake of breath, the way his hand trembled against her stomach. "Rhea, are you saying—" "I'm pregnant, Cole. We're going to have a baby." The sound he made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He gathered her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, his whole body shaking with emotion. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Are you happy? He pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears streaming freely down his weathered cheeks. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. I never thought, after Emma, I never thought I'd have this again. Never thought I deserved it. You deserve everything good in this world, Cole Barron. Everything. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, as if she were something precious that might break. And maybe she was. Maybe they both were. Two broken people who'd somehow found their way to each other and built something whole from the fragments of their former lives. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through winter and into spring. Rhea grew round and heavy, her body changing in ways that still surprised her each morning. Cole fussed over her constantly, too much, in her opinion, but she couldn't bring herself to truly object. His attentiveness came from love, from fear, from the desperate need to protect this miracle they'd created together. Their son was born on a warm April morning after 12 hours of labor that left Rhea exhausted but triumphant. Cole held the baby in his arms, tears streaming down his face, and whispered promises that Rhea knew he would keep. They named him Thomas Daniel Barron, Thomas for Rhea's father, Daniel for the husband who'd loved her first, a name that honored the dead while celebrating the living. He has your eyes, Cole said, studying the tiny face with wonder, that same stubborn set to his chin. And your hands, Rhea replied, touching the baby's perfect fingers. Strong hands. Builder's hands. He'll need them. There's a lot of work to do in this world. There always is. They brought Thomas home to the house Cole had built, and Rhea felt the last piece of her heart click into place. This was her family, her future. Everything she'd thought she'd lost when Daniel died, when her father fell, when the world collapsed around her. It had all been leading to this. The years turned like pages in a book, each one adding new chapters to their story. A daughter came next. Emma Rose, named for the wife and child Cole had lost. Rhea had worried about the name at first, worried it would bring too much pain, but Cole had insisted. They were part of my life, he said, part of who I am. I don't want to forget them. I want to honor them. And so Emma Rose joined Thomas Daniel in the nursery, and the house that had once seemed too large for two people now rang with the sounds of children. The ranch prospered. Cole's livestock multiplied. Rhea's garden became legendary throughout the valley. People rode from miles away to buy her vegetables, her preserves, her grandmother's recipe for apple butter that won first prize at the county fair 3 years running. Jack visited whenever he could, bringing stories from Tucson and spoiling his niece and nephew with candy and toys. He'd made deputy now, working his way up the same path Cole had once walked, and there was talk of him running for sheriff when the position opened up. You should be proud, Rhea told Cole one evening, watching Jack play with the children in the yard. You raised him right. He raised himself mostly. I just tried not to get in the way. That's not true, and you know it. Cole smiled, that quiet smile she still loved after all these years. Maybe not. But he did the hard work. He chose to be good when he could have chosen otherwise. Like you did. Like we both did. The children grew. Thomas inherited his father's steady temperament and his grandfather's love of the land. Emma had her mother's fire, a stubborn streak a mile wide and a heart just as big. They learned to ride before they could read, to shoot before they could drive a wagon, to stand their ground against anyone who tried to push them around. Good Arizona stock, the neighbors said. Barren blood through and through. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Cole built an addition to the house, a room just for them, separate from the children's quarters, with a big window overlooking the valley they'd fought so hard to protect. He didn't tell her he was doing it, just worked quietly whenever she was busy elsewhere, until one evening he took her hand and led her inside. Cole, she breathed, taking in the space. How did you? I wanted to give you something, he said. Something that was just ours, a place where we could be alone together, even with the children growing and the ranch expanding and everything else that pulls at us. She turned to face him, this man who had transformed her life. Silver threaded through his dark hair now. Lines marked his face that hadn't been there when they met. But his eyes were the same, that winter blue that had captured her heart on a dusty porch all those years ago. I love you, she said. Have I told you that today? Not in the last hour. Then I love you more than I did yesterday, more than I thought I could love anyone. He pulled her close. The feeling is mutual, Mrs. Barron. They stood together in the room he'd built for her, watching the sun set over their valley, and Rhea felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was happiness, real happiness, the kind she'd stopped believing in after Daniel died. And she had Cole to thank for it. The years continued to turn. Thomas married a schoolteacher from town, a fiery redhead who reminded Rhea so much of herself that she laughed the first time they met. They built a house on the northern edge of the property, close enough to visit daily but far enough for independence. Emma fell in love with the Henderson boy, now grown into a fine young man who'd inherited his father's ranch, and their wedding was the biggest celebration the valley had ever seen. Grandchildren came, 4 from Thomas, 3 from Emma. The house that had once been too large now felt almost too small, especially during holidays when the entire family gathered around tables groaning with food. Cole's hair turned fully white. Rhea's hands grew gnarled with age. They moved more slowly now, talked more quietly. But the love between them remained unchanged, a constant star in the ever-shifting sky of their lives. On their 30th anniversary, they sat together on the porch swing Cole had built so long ago. The wood was worn smooth now, polished by years of use, creaking gently as they rocked in the evening breeze. The sun was setting, one of those Arizona sunsets that painted the sky in impossible colors, as if God himself had dipped his brush in fire and gold. Rhea. Cole's voice was soft, contemplative. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't ridden up to your ranch that day? She considered the question. It was one she'd asked herself many times over the years, in quiet moments when the past felt close enough to touch. Sometimes, she admitted, I probably would have run east like I planned, found some cousin who'd take pity on me, lived out my days as a poor relation, never quite belonging anywhere. You would have survived. You're too stubborn to do anything else. Survived, yes, but I wouldn't have lived. She turned to look at him. There's a difference, Cole. I didn't understand that until you showed me. He took her hand, that same hand he'd kissed on the day he left for Tucson, the day everything changed. His grip was weaker now, his fingers crooked with age, but the warmth was the same. I was dead before I met you, he said quietly, walking around, breathing, hunting outlaws, but dead inside. Sarah and Emma took everything with them when they went. I thought I'd never feel anything again. And then I met a woman with a shotgun and fire in her eyes, and she brought me back to life. He smiled. You saved me, Rhea, just as much as I saved you. Tears prickled at her eyes. After 30 years, after everything they'd been through, he could still make her cry. Any regrets? She asked. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the sunset. She watched his profile, the strong jaw softened by age, the proud nose, the eyes that had seen so much and still managed to find beauty in the world. Not one, he said finally. Not a single one. Even the hard parts, the fights, the fear, the times we didn't know if we'd survive? Especially those parts. He turned to face her, cupping her weathered face in his weathered hands. Every moment of hardship led us here, Rhea. To this porch, this sunset, this life we built together. I wouldn't trade any of it. She leaned into his touch, feeling the familiar calluses, the gentle strength that had held her through decades of joy and sorrow. Neither would I. They sat in silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer by, the sounds of their grandchildren's laughter drifted from Thomas's house, carried on the evening breeze. This was their legacy. Not the land or the livestock or the house Cole had built with his own 2 hands. The legacy was love, passed down through generations, rooted deep in the Arizona soil, growing stronger with each passing year. Rhea rested her head on Cole's shoulder and closed her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For everything. For riding up to my ranch that day. For staying when you could have left. For loving me when I'd forgotten how to love myself. Cole pressed a kiss to her hair. Thank you for letting me. The stars began to emerge one by one, scattered across the darkening sky like diamonds on velvet. The same stars that had watched over them on their wedding night. The same stars that had witnessed their battles and their victories, their losses and their gains. The same stars that would continue to shine long after they were gone. Cole? Yes, my love? When I thought my story was over, when Daniel died and my father died and I was standing on that porch ready to give up, I never imagined this. Any of this. The happiness, the family, the life we've built. And now? She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked, seeing not just the man he'd become, but the man he'd always been. The protector, the builder, the lover who had never stopped fighting for her. Now I know the truth, she said. My story wasn't over. It was just waiting for you to write the next chapter. Cole smiled. That quiet, beautiful smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. We wrote it together, he said. Every word. Yes, she kissed him softly. We did. The swing creaked gently as they rocked together in the darkness, two hearts that had found each other against all odds and refused to let go. Behind them, the house glowed with warm light. Before them, the valley stretched out in peaceful silence. And above them, the stars kept their eternal watch. A complete story, a closed chapter, a love that would last forever.